It's 9:30. All are on stage, and we're good to go. So therefore, I think we can really start and start the adventure of IDSA Winterdays. 2 days full of great content. So it's my pleasure to open the IDSA Winterdays. Trust all the way is the slogan. As you can see here, I'm sending not from outer space but from home office. Finally, after several vaccinations, I got infected with corona and have to stay home. So thanks for all the colleagues which stand in for me in our great studio in the office. So good to see you, Julia. You will lead us through the day together with Adrian. Nevertheless, I'm in perfect mood and fine. So let's start. The slogan for to set up and try sovereign and the core of that we all have to benefit. And we're talking about but this is the challenge companies and even people are facing. So, Stella, once
Lars, sorry to interrupt. I cannot hear you very well. I don't know if it's just me.
It's true.
Also the others.
I think it's everyone because
it's very cluttered
in the chat. Yeah. I think Lars, you might have some issue with the microphone.
Okay, is it better now? I put it closer.
Much
Sounds
better.
like, yeah.
Much better. So let's use this much better situation. So the question which every company has to answer is: so should I plug in to a data space or not? And what we have to give is trust, so that they have transparency and then that they can take an informed decision. So what happens to my data, via which infrastructure is it shared, which component, who is accessing to it? So that is what we need. And that is essentially what we call trust, right? So what you will learn throughout the IDSA Winterdays and in all the endeavors which we are driving jointly is, well, how to really ensure trust. So trust, on a technical level, we have to set up and bring in components for controlled, sovereign, and secure sharing of data so that we know what happens there, hardware, software. We need to ensure trust on a semantic level so that we and every company and every citizen, every user of data out there understands the meaning and also the usage conditions attached to a set of data so that they understand what is it and that these obligations, these constraints can even be technically enforced so that we really can have data sovereignty. We also need trust operational level, so a lot of clear agreements. We need clear responsibilities, clear roles in the ecosystems, who does what, who's responsible, who's the referee, so to say, at the end. And we need the clear business process to really run these data spaces. So it's also about the running of data spaces and all of this. So we have to also focus the legal perspective of it. They have to follow legally binding agreements. So that is also what we have to provide in order to really ensure trust. You will learn a lot about this during the winter days, during the next 2 days. I'm happy that we could convince 20 experts in data spaces to set up this great program. We could invite more than 50 speakers to these 2 days of content. And thanks a lot to my team in the head office to really make the winter days happen. And here with me on stage, you see very, very important people. Because these guys with me here, Ana Garcia, Francesco Bonfiglio, and Ulrich Ahle, they help all of us to make data economy a real success. Because, well, IDSA, we cannot do that alone, not at all. We have to team up. We need all the different competencies, all the capabilities which I've mentioned on technical level, on organizational, legal level, on business level. And that is why we've teamed up with the others to Data Spaces Business Alliance. We have teamed up IDSA with Big Data Value Association, with Gaia X, and with Fireware Foundation. And, well, why did we do so? Why do we need that? Well, we all represent large ecosystems, and that is what we want to make flourish. We need the full stack from hardware, from the soft infrastructure, all the way up from the technical level, semantic level, up to the business processes, so that we at the end can realize all the nice things on big data and AI. Well, and who could better represent that than our 4 organizations? And what we want to do is we want to provide clear solutions which you can use now, so that you can build data spaces this year. We want to build data spaces this year. We want to make them happen. We want to leave impact. And, well, that is what I would like to ask my dear colleagues. So how can you be of help? What can you contribute? And why do you think teaming up will help and speed up? So I will hand over first to Ana Garcia, Secretary General of Big Data Value Association. So we have had great, well, 4.5 or 5 months even already in this DSBA. Ana, why is this a cool idea, and what can BDVA contribute to the success?
Thank you very much, Lars. It's a big pleasure and honor for me to be here, and welcome to all the audience of the IDSA Winterdays, and congratulations to the IDSA team. So, Lars, I think I will start talking about our contribution, and then I will move into saying why, I would say more than a cool idea, why this is a must, why I mean, not to do this could be really a failure. That's the way I think I will answer the question. That maybe a couple of minutes, 3 minutes to talk about the BDVA contribution, because I think it's the combining the assets of the 4 associations what really brings a strong value. So as we are talking a lot about trust, you started talking about trust. So one of the main assets of the community is already for years, we define this kind of data experimentation ecosystems that we call TIE spaces that we label. So we have a label to define or to determine what are these data experimentation ecosystems, and we're around secure data infrastructures at the local regional level. Different companies join forces to experiment, in data sharing. How do we do it technically? Why should I share with you? What is the value of sharing? And through these different IS spaces, large companies, SMEs, and in particular, they have a lot of purpose to support SMEs. They have been really learning over a few years about the value of data sharing. What we have done recently, and this is the best asset, I think one of the best assets that comes to the Federation, and also with where IDSA is heavily involved, is federating all these, let's say, data experimentation ecosystem. So there is now a project called U.S. for Data helping to build this federation, and this is just the first stage. And with this, we have over 30 different data experimentation ecosystems connected with a federated catalog, also using IDSA resources, and really giving cross-border and cross-sectorial experimentation opportunities for SMEs to enter into the data space domain, but also supporting different technologies and to really test and experiment as a first step to make data spaces happen. So this is a big, let's say, almost infrastructure that comes to the Data Spaces Business Alliance. Second asset, and I think we all bring this, is the community. And of course, the communities are different. There is a lot of experts in the community. We are a mixed community research industry. We are a mixed community data and AI. And we are very, let's say, industry-driven but research-oriented. So I think we bring a lot of possibilities for disruption here. So, and it's a very well-functioning community. that over years have been developing quite a lot of assets, principles, frameworks, strategic agendas. And I think this, disruption-oriented mindset can really bring and is bringing a lot of value to our common endeavor. I also want to say about cases. We have been running a partnership for years, and there are multiple cases where many of you are already involved. So where IDSA components are being tested, where fireware is also very much involved. And we have a large-scale pilots in different sectors, the data platform projects that are being developed at the moment with a lot of technologies, methodologies, a lot of knowledge out there, pre-competitive, that should come into the business alliance to make, to accelerate, let's say, the go-to-market. So this is the third point. Then we go to so we are a data and AI community. We are a mixed community. So for us, it's very important that everything that is done in data spaces is really linked to the adoption of AI. That will bring a lot of value out of this data sharing. So that's an important asset for us. And now, of course, we can talk also about connection with other players, the aspect of skills, but I think it's important to address now your point of why we are doing this. And I have 3 points here. First, because not doing this will be a failure. So one of the main issues or challenges that we have really to really make our dream of this data economy happen is fragmentation. So if we don't bring the different communities together, if we don't bring the different existing assets, if we don't bring all these things together, we are not going to succeed. We need to work with a common vision, and that's what we are building here to really make this happen. So not to do it will be a failure. Second point, important for us. So we've been working in this pre-competitive, more research and innovation oriented. Collaborating with you and with others really is the help to a step to the market. So really, this is the way that we can really leverage a lot of investments, a lot of knowledge, and to take it to the market. And it's thanks to this collaboration that I have a lot of faith that we are really gonna make this happen, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time, but we take all this knowledge and take it there. And that's, for me, a strong value that you bring to our community. And finally, and this is a personal observation, but I want to share this with all the audience. This is the place where the good dialogues and the things are happening. So I'm involved in many collaborations, and there are collaborations where you think that this is going to take us to the future, and others where, okay, it's nice to have, it needs to be there. It's here where the good discussions with the important questions and the important answers are taking place. And for that reason, also, I encourage, I know most of the audience is already quite connected to all these activities, but really encourage everybody listening to us to connect to what we are doing, as, again, I think this is really taking us to a very good place. And thank you, Lars, again, and team for taking us today.
Well, this is a must, Anna, to have you here. Thank you very much. And so my intention today is to foster a bit the understanding of what are the assets and the capabilities of the respective organizations, so that we really can leverage it with our bodies and our work streams in the respective organizations. And I hope that we'll find a lot of touch points these days, I'm sure. We already have a lot of touch points with Gaia-X, and Francesco, well, give us latest news about Gaia-X, what you are doing, and why even such a great initiative like Gaia-X needs to team up in Europe. Hi, Francesco, good to have you here.
Hi, Lars. Hi, everybody. Hi to the gang of 4. Sorry, I like this word because one of my first, well, it was not my first job. My second job was in Rational Software, and we used to have this gang of 4, which were the 4 leaders in software engineering. You might remember Brady Butch, Ian Rambo, Ivo Jakobsson, and others. Anyway, let me start from the second question, because we're doing a lot of things. I don't want to bother anybody. Why and what we can contribute from Gaia-X and why we're doing it. And First of all, I second all Anna said about the only mistake is not doing it, not working together. There's no reason not to do it. I would simply add a simple concept, is that doing this joint endeavor, which instantiate into the Data Space Business Alliance, which is basically this agreement between the four associations through which we are working together, we are joining forces, etc. But doing this alliance, we are constituting the first and by far the largest think tank, or we are becoming the thought leaders in Europe on data spaces and trusted platforms, which is not trivial. So nothing like that happened in the past, as long as I can remember. So that's why we have to do it. How GaiaX can contribute? What is GaiaX bringing to the table? Three main things. We heard Lars talking about the need for digital trust. I think that trust is the most inflection, together with sovereignty, is the most inflection words in the last couple of years in Europe. So everybody talks about the need of sovereignty, everybody talks about the need of trust, but what is it? Can you buy trust? I keep preaching that, no, you cannot buy trust. You cannot even impose trust only through regulations. You can make them as strong as you want. People will not trust regulations, will not trust any more digital platforms unless they find a tangible, objective verification of the characteristics of the services, of the platforms they are buying or using. That's what GaiaX brings as a first point of the table. We are building a digital trust implementation through technology, adopting the state-of-the-art and edge technologies about identity, distributed computing, distributed consensus, decentralized architectures, and all the key technologies that nowadays make it possible. So we are making it possible to verify the veracity and the reliability of the declarations and the characteristics of any service that will be provided in Europe. That's the first point we're bringing in, and that was and is still a long awaited and needed by everybody in Europe and outside of Europe. Let's be careful about that. The second point we bring is the largest European representation, I believe, of users and providers of technology, with the very best mix between large and small companies, large enterprise and small, medium-sized, down to startups. So we are representing the voice of the market with no influence, by no means. We have no subsidies. We are not affiliated to any public institution. So we are a pure representation of the needs and the voice of the market. And that's important when you want to realize something that brings business outcomes, which is what we want to achieve. The third element we bring is a broad portfolio of business projects. We have started with some lighthouse projects, but now we start to have quite few. So they are projects, not just lighthouse projects, in many domains that aim to develop business services in different domains. We started in the automotive, we moved into the agriculture, into the mobility and healthcare, and on and on. Now you can imagine that smart cities, artificial intelligence, or any domain is of course in scope, because we have to build digital services on trusted platforms in all those ecosystems. And that's why we can bring our portfolio and also leverage the portfolio of projects from Fiverr, from BDVA, from IDSA, and all together we can, combine each other, compensate each other with the missing blocks, with the missing pieces that none of us own them all, and build something that in the end creates marketplaces of GaiaX services in Europe. This is the only and by far the most tangible way to produce a result and make it visible, because people will have to touch with their hands what that means. So we bring these three things: a trust layer, we bring this community, which is extremely representative of Europe, and we bring a portfolio project. But most importantly, we bring our passion together with the passion of my colleagues here. We bring the passion of hundreds and thousands of people. We have 324 members and thousands of people behind them, all working for the same mission. Like everybody said, and I think I said it as well, this is the last call, let me say, for Europe. But I think the more I'm in this endeavor, the more I believe it's not only doable, but we're doing it. And this is extremely exciting. So every time we make a step ahead like this alliance, we are accelerating. We're just not making one step ahead. We are making hundreds, thousands of steps ahead. And the more we bring in together, the more the acceleration will be exponential and not linear, like everybody expects.
Yeah, so true. Great. So, well, the last call for Europe, I like that. The Fantastic Four, we will help that it will be a success afterwards. I'm sure, and I'm happy to drive that with you. And let's move over to the fourth in a row, Ulrich Ahle, CEO of Fireware Foundation and also member of the board of IDSA. But today he has the Fireware hat on. So Ulrich, Fireware has been a trailblazer for years, perhaps even a decade, in these digital platforms and ecosystems. So you have a lot of experience, you have a lot of items, assets to bring to the party. So let us know more about that, and let us also know about your thoughts why teaming up will move us to a positive way towards the better Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Lars, and a very good morning, good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are on the world. And let me simply use a story from India. And this is not a fairy tale from 1001 Nights. It is a true story which hopefully underlines why we are a strong believer in the Data Spaces Business Alliance and why we are so engaged in there. And why we are trying to provide some of the required building blocks to make interoperable data spaces and data-driven ecosystems reality. And the motto of today is trust all the way. So trust is clearly a prerequisite to enable data-driven business models, but it's not sufficient. We need also access to the data. We need interoperability. And let me here start this story. Some of you might know this story, so bear with me and be a bit patient for the next 3 minutes. But this story starts when Prime Minister Modi in India was elected for the first time back in 2014, so 8 years ago. And 1 year later, the cabinet in India approved 13.6 billion, not million, billion US dollar, compared into Indian rupees, for the Smart Cities program in India, the so-called 100 Smart Cities program. So a big investment into the digitization of Indian cities. In the meantime, 7 years ago. A big market for the global consulting companies. So the big players supported the cities in creating their smart city strategy, bringing first tenders to the market, supporting the implementation of the first solutions. And this was a puzzle of different solutions. A lot of money was invested. And I met the Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, who was responsible for this program, Minister Hardip Singh Puri, exactly 4 years ago for the first time. And 3 years ago, beginning of 2019, I was invited by the World Bank to a smart city event in Delhi. And sometimes you need to be at the right place in the right moment. So I've been on a panel similar like this one, moderated by the State Secretary, who is operationally responsible for this 100 Smart City program. And they identified something is going wrong in the program because a lot of money was spent. Each city has built its own silo. There were only limited synergy potentials between the different cities. And what they identified after 4 years of the program, the wheel has been reinvented several times using public funding and public money, taxpayers' money. And when he heard my presentation and the discussion we had on the panel, he came to me after the panel and said, we need to talk. I had a meeting the same night in the ministry. And since roughly 2 years, we as FIVER are supporting a program in India called India Urban Data Exchange. This is led by the India Institute of Science in Bangalore. We created together with the institute first a new reference architecture for smart cities. And here, standard APIs coming out of the FIVER ecosystem, standard data models, and open source technology are part of that. And now we have today the 16th, a bit less than 1 year ago, on February 23rd of last year, the Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, together with the Minister of Technology in India, introduced this new platform, this new data space for cities as the new standard smart city platform for India. Not with the intention to bring it to the 100 cities which have done their implementations, mostly with proprietary solutions, mostly solutions coming from other countries than India. I'm not mentioning where it's coming from. And this new standard platform, which was implemented using open source technology from FIVER, but also other components, but using FIVER APIs, using FIVER data models, this is now the new standard smart city platform for India, for the remaining 4,300 large cities in India. And remember, India is 3 times larger than the total of Europe. And the IODX program, the India Urban Data Exchange program, is now heavily supporting us in the further development of globally used data models and also the adoption of the API. And this shows that, and these are the 2 components we would like to bring out of our ecosystem to the Data Spaces Business Alliance and to the creation of interoperable data spaces in Europe, on top of trust, which I said is the prerequisite to have interoperability building blocks, standard APIs, standard data models, to allow data spaces in different domains to exchange data. Looking at the smart communities data space, for example, it needs to be able to exchange data with smart mobility, with smart energy, with smart manufacturing, which is happening in cities. So therefore, this interoperability is of utmost importance. And these building blocks we brought in India, it is not research, it is not experimentation, it is reality. In the meantime, implemented in, I think, 20 cities in India, creating value for the citizens, reducing the cost of operating a city or a community, and it is reality. And this reality we would like to bring in as a small contribution from the FIVER ecosystem to this Data Spaces Business Alliance. So I hope this story, and again, it's not a fairy tale, underlines a bit about our motivation, why we joined this initiative.
Yeah, well, thank you for this insight. It's very clear that you will be an important part of DSBA. I think we can have a lot of learnings, obviously, from India. So really learn not to follow this path. I think. Well, the Commission obviously has smelled that they should not step in the same trap as India has done so. So therefore, well, on the one hand side, they defined the next silos with the sectoral data spaces, but at the same time, they stated very clearly that we need a clear, well, soft infrastructure, a framework, a smart middleware, which harmonizes and well, fosters interoperability between all these data spaces. And well, that is exactly what we are going to do. So with Data Spaces Business Alliance, we want to, well, be the North Star for the development and the success of data spaces, the go-to place. So that you find everything in one place, which is already agreed, harmonized, and interoperable. So one-stop shop. I think, Francesco, that was your wording, and yeah, that is what we need. And well, let's take India with 4,300 smart cities as an inspiration. Yeah, well, I'm confident, and obviously with all the capabilities which we do have at the table, we will get this managed. So it's not only the four of us; it's so the four of us with all our members, with all our partners, with the million probably of people behind, and we can really leave impact. We should be confident, and I'm looking forward to that. So, well, great. I'm looking forward to it. We have a clear work plan. We will interweave our activities in DSPA with the existing activities in our organization. We will not create a separate layer. No, we will leverage what is there. We will harmonize. We will assemble, stick it together, and come up with this one-stop shop. That is our ambition, and that will be great. You will see first results this year. We will invite you to several events and activities. Well, starting in the next weeks, you can really be keen to learn and see more. So, time is over, unfortunately, once again. Anna, Francesco, Ulrich. It's always great to talk, and I think it's so important to share our thoughts, which are very well aligned in front of a big audience. And yeah, well, we will promote that we are the go-to place for data spaces. Thank you for being here. Thank you for, being by my side. This is so great. Looking forward to the future. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
And have a great winter days.
Yeah.
Have a good event.
With some
Bye-bye.
possible.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Also, from my side, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's also a pleasure to be able to guide you through the session this morning. For those that don't know me, my name is Giulia Giussani. I'm part of the head office here in Dortmund, and I'm part of the adoption team. So I'm very thrilled to invite on stage the next speakers. They're also colleagues of mine from the head office, from the adoption team. Yeah, I think these were the best and perfect opening words into our winter days to highlight the relevance of what we are doing here today, and yeah, to also underline the collaborative approach, which I think is a real critical factor in these cases. So after these great opening words, let's jump into the next session, which is how we can really build these data spaces. So my colleague Christoph Mertens from the adoption team, head of adoption, is here with us today, and also our colleague Marcos, senior project manager of IDSA. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. Hey, Marcos, good to see you.
Good morning, Christoph. Great to see you, and thank you very much, Julia, for the kind introduction to this very nice session.
Absolutely. So let me see that I set up here the slides that we brought with us to walk you through. So basically, we thought this is more or less, yeah, we walk you through the agenda basically with a bit more of content. So let's see, Bildschirm teilen. This one goes down. This one will be shared. Perfect. Thank you very much. So the session now is called Journey, 5 steps to build data spaces. For those of you who are new to the game, glad that you joined at this point in time, because 5 steps sounds like very easy to handle. It's only 5 steps, so that's great. For those of you with us already for a longer time, you know that the journey towards a data space, to build one, to operate one, to join one, can be very difficult. Yeah? So the fact that it is not an easy thing to do brought us to the point where we realized, okay, we sort of need to make it handleable better. Yeah, we have so many documents created throughout the past years, including things like the reference architecture itself and many other documents with use cases described, etc., that it can be very tricky to know where to start your journey. And it was in the past a bit easier to step into data sharing, where we came from in the past decades is a one-on-one data exchange with two participants or two companies sharing data. That's sort of not too much complexity behind it. Then in recent times, and this is more or less where we stand and we are in the transitioning phase, it became a bit more complex. So you had few data exchanges with platforms, with cloud solutions, with your very own ecosystems where you selected the participants. So that was a bit more complex, but I think we are in a phase where we're very well handling this situation. Now with data spaces, it becomes more. Complexity raises, number of participants raises, so it's becoming more complex. The 5-step approach tries to make your life easier so that you can handle this complexity and start your journey, or also even if you are already in this journey, you can get some guidance. And without further ado, I really would like to have a quick run through these 5 steps to give you an overview before I hand over to Marcos, who gives you some more in-depth insights into this topic. So what are these 5 steps? The journey in data spaces starts with learning, basically. So gathering knowledge. I showed you the tons of documents that we created. There's a lot more online in GitHub, in other repositories, in online publications. Depending on the role that you will take in the game of data spaces, there are different documents that might be a better start for you. So as a technician, starting with a reference architecture is a good idea, maybe. If you're more from the business side, this will overwhelm you probably. But also for the business side, we have better documents that serve your needs, that make it understandable what data spaces are about, and to position you, your company, your ecosystem in this game and bring you into the journey. That's the first step always. Learning is always good. Before you then, in the second step, can start creating your use case. The journey continues with your very own business needs, understanding your domain-specific needs, understanding your business needs with your partners with whom you want to exchange data, seeing who is part of the ecosystem, and maybe even looking over the rim of the teacup by seeing who else is part in the domain and with whom am I not exchanging data so far, but maybe data spaces can be an enabler for yet the next business. And there are frameworks for that. So defining use cases is a thing that is supported by different kinds of methodologies. We can point you to those in case you are not already aware of it. This afternoon, we will have a workshop from a project that deals with health data spaces, also trying or making their first steps in defining use cases. So this is already on. Then once you decided with whom do you want to exchange data, what is happening in your scenarios, it's a good idea to start building your components, or maybe even reaching out to partners that supply these components. And that can reach from easy examples like you only want to share data, you only need a connector, so you only need a connector, all the way up to, okay, we need the entire ecosystem. We have to build the infrastructure. So it can be rather easy, but it also can get very complex very quick. This would be the third step. Once you are there, once you have the components set up, it is important to start bringing your use case to life. It is a bit more than only a technical challenge to build data spaces. It's also related to legal things, to governance, to certification topics. And all of these things have to be covered if you really want to have a proper data space that brings trust all the way. And then last but not least, you are there with a fifth step and you really can start your business. You can start exchanging data. you can start consuming data, and then also the fun starts with AI, big data, with all the methodologies that in recent times arised. And yeah, that is really where we imagine data economy to be in not too much time, I would say. And the talks before with all the people behind it make me very confident that this will be a great thing. That only was the overview of the 5 steps. Marcos, I think you brought with you much more insights. And I said at the beginning, this is more or less a walkthrough through the agenda. So Marcos, please, stage is yours.
Thank you, Christoph. And before we move to explaining, giving some insights about every step, I want to stay for a bit on 2 things that were mentioned until now. So the first is what you said. This is a walkthrough through the agenda, more or less. We are happy that we made this Winter Days revolve, so to say, around these 5 steps to show you that this is a complex thing, but breaking it down into some steps that totally make sense to follow. And we've seen that it works like that, and pointing to the different sessions that you can see examples, first of all, of best practices in the different steps, but also ways for you to make use of services that IDS experts offer in the different steps is something that we want to guide you through today. And the second part is what also the big 4 mentioned before. It's not only the 4 of us. It's not the 4 of them. It's not the IDSA head office. It's not the members. It's many more. This is so extended. It's a community work. And what you are about to see as insights, you cannot find it at once on the adoption page or on GitHub, but also through contacting the A team, which I'm proudly representing today to walk you through this. And the vision is that this at some point becomes so automated that one newcomer can go through the steps and understand, okay, I need to read these documents and then build my case and then contact this company to help me build components. But for now, we have more newcomers than existing users of the standard. So we want to create with you this automation, and we are happy that we can bring you insights for that. With that, I'm moving to the first step. And Christoph, if you can. Yeah, exactly. So it's the gather knowledge and find your role step. I think that we could fill easily 2 or 3 slides with these circles. We just have some representative ones here as most important documents, reference architecture model, with the rule book, with different papers that have been published out there that show the relationship of IDS with Gaia, that show how business model can be created based on IDS. Many interesting information that you might find on most important documents that are continuously updated on our website and on GitHub, of course. Then we have the radar. It's a tool that started almost 7 months ago and is already growing rapidly to basically show the progress of different use cases and data space towards adopting IDS solution. It's all the basic trainings that one can get when starting to understand basically what value data sovereignty and data spaces can create for them. And it's, of course, all the sessions that you, at least on a monthly basis, can participate and get more knowledge, ask questions, and become part of the extended community that either supplies IDS solutions or uses them. So next, we see the step of creating your data set use case. And here I want to mention, of course, the part of defining a data sharing use case. So how is this being built and how exactly the different stakeholders interact in a data space to make extra value and benefits for all the parties that participate in one. And then it's also starting to get a bit more technical in the sense of what kind of components you will need and communication wide. And here we want to introduce, and we will see also later in different sessions, the business implementation partners, the ones that can help a consortium, an ecosystem build, let's say, a data space according to their needs. And here you see this snowflake that shows basically which session you should be looking for. And in fact, it is the next one, and I'm probably wrong with the timing there. I just realized because we are at 10 a.m. right now. But in any case, we will see in this session how a methodology, an example of a methodology on how to realize an interoperable use case, and how a single use case can develop into a large scale ecosystem, and how can participants understand the value that can be created. Then the third step is the build or buy the necessary components. Exactly. And here, by getting in contact with us or the technology implementation partners of us, you will see and understand what solutions exist out there and how you could be supported to create your own components or buy from providers of components and adapt them to your specific needs, or get an implementation partner to do this adaptation. And here, since this is the core of IDS, the standard and its components, we have at least 3, I would say, sessions that are related to this step. And starting for the first one that you can see today about the open source community, and basically what is it, how you can contribute, and why does it exist. And there will be a demonstration on how you can do any suggestions, send issues, how issues are resolved for open source projects related to IDS components and so on. The next one is the session called Putting It All Together. I'm really excited for this session because we will see basically development examples of many components for data spaces. We'll see a dApps development example, broker, 3 different connectors, and we will understand a bit how the developer journey looks like, and how can you get information about them, how they're organized, and how at the end it is ensured that their components are interoperable with each other. What kind of events exist? What kind of testing tools exist? And finally, a very important session, the how to build data spaces session, on basically what are the building blocks and common frameworks that, from also what we heard in the DSVA opening session, at least it was IDSA opening session, but it talked a bit about the vision of having a framework. We are all together in this to make some data spaces, a lot of them, that are interoperable with each other based on certain building blocks. And we will hear about how data spaces actually are already here, and how the ecosystems can grow bigger, and why the risks increase for creating silos again. Certain building blocks that we are united to come up with will make sure that interoperable architecture will be created. On the fourth step, it will be all about how, after building your components, you can bring them to life. And the winter days of this year are all about trust. We know this, and we're going to see how with the testbed and the certification, both for technical and the components and the operational environments, the evaluation facilities can guarantee that you're a participant that can participate and be trusted, can participate in data spaces and be trusted. So there we will, you can, first of all, through the documents that you can find on GitHub, experience our testbed, understand where you should go to test and start with your certification process. And basically, we will see 2 events, 2 sessions on that. The one will be, of course, about the testbed, things on how to install it, how to connect your components to it, how to start creating a data space on the basis of the testbed, and also, since this is something open, how to contribute to it. And then the certification will be this step-by-step process session that will try to give explanations on how to prepare for certification and what kind of preparation you need to do depending on what kind of certification you're looking for and whether this is a technical or operational one. And finally, the 5th step, even if it seems like you're done, so you successfully have adopted the IDS standard, we want, of course, after data spaces have been built, to run successfully. And this is where we're going to see some success stories. And more specifically, there will be a session on how to run a data space where we will look under the hood of the mobility data space that we can say went live during the last IDS Congress in October. And we will see mobility data space as a prime example on how a data space builds on top of the IDS core components. And we will take this also from the implementation partners' perspective on how they're paving the way for software adoption, taking the components and creating a data space based on them, how they can offer other things as implementation partners that are, let's say, experts on IDS, how they can offer compatibility with Gaia-X, and how they can help the ones that participate in a data space to identify use case. But also we will see more details on how the architecture of mobility data space looks like, and how the core components are put together. Next to, of course, some presentation of use cases that will focus also on what kind of benefits can be created from using or participating in a data space. Why is it better than doing this alone? And of course, we will see also what is still missing. What are the things that need to become better, as this is the first effort for a data space that was announced going live. And finally, one presentation and one session that I'm really happy to also co-moderate tomorrow from the head office, which is the how to connect data spaces. At the end, this is the vision to have data spaces that can be connected with each other, that are fully interoperable, and one can be a participant with the same connector to different data spaces and leverage from data sovereignty on them. And yeah, I think that with that, I'm closing, let's say, this 5 steps. And before giving it back to Christoph to maybe say a few words about how A-Team and the Adoption Accelerator program can be of support for you to move from step to step, I want to mention once again that we understand that this is a complex process, but we are here with our experts, with our experience, the community, the whole ecosystems and networking that we can offer to you to bring you forward any step that you might be into. So Christoph, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcos, for this walkthrough through the 5 steps. And here we have it again as an overview. I think due to the fact that it's only 5 steps, it's also very easy to remember, also for you to make your decision. Where do I stand? Do I have to first go to the learning step, the first step? Do I have to start from the beginning, or am I already involved in building things, open source projects, and so on and so forth? And the upcoming 2 days will be full of examples. Marcos showed you only a few of the sessions that are ahead of us, going into deep with the different topics, showing examples, showing best practices, showing you how to get involved here for your very own purposes, rather it be contributing to the standardization or also be it doing and implementing. We have the table served for all of these different kinds of needs. So learning, building use cases, creating the components, or having people and companies build these components for your scenario, prepare for bringing a use case to life by going through certification and establishing a real trust in this ecosystem, and then being there and sharing data. That's how the journey looks. And the message here was already conducted now 2 or 3 times. Regardless on your stage of knowledge, regardless on where you are in this journey, you're not alone on this journey. There are thousands of people, millions is something that Lars said, I think. And it's not too much to say, that's really where we are. We are in contact with so many people and companies on all of these different topics that the key here is the community behind all these topics. No one will build the data space on their own. No one will succeed in striving forward on their own. It's a community effort. It's a federated approach. It's a thing that we will do together. And we as an adoption team from the IDSA are glad also to support you if you are on our webpage, on our GitHub account, trying to find your way and you struggle at a certain point in time. We are here to support you in finding your information that you need in order to gear up. And this is also something where we as head office are not alone. So implementation partners are our experts on the topic that can guide you through the process, technical aspects, legal aspects, governance aspects, business case development. These are all things that are supported by our network and not only us. So it's really on broad shoulders what we showed you here today and will show you in the next upcoming 2 days. And what you can see here on this slide also underlines this aspect, that it is possible to have insights on all different levels and to have support to go together with others. A more isolated thing on the left side, the data space radar, is just something that you can browse. You can go there, have a look, get inspired by use cases that are already on there. In case you are already 2 steps further and you have your own use case, the maturity assessment by making your way to the radar for your own use case is something that maybe helps you also to realize where you stand. What are your ambitions? Do you want to be the live use case in mobility data space, or is it something where you are sufficient with piloting the scenario because you are in research, or you are just doing first steps in seeing if that concept works out for you? These things are things that you can do on your own. Just browse our website, go there and get inspired. IDS Academy, our approach to bring all this knowledge not only in form of publications to you, but also guiding you a bit better through things that are out there, starting with a knowledge base that you can find on our GitHub, It's called How to Build Data Spaces, so you will be able to find it easily, is a thing that also can be used on your own. And it's not only about using. So as you know, the IDSA stands for contributing, co-creating. So also this knowledge base is something that relies on you as those who really are out there building use cases, building data spaces, building components to let us know if the descriptions that you'll find on the knowledge base and the other documents is matching still your reality. And in the discussion with you, we make things better, we groom repositories, we groom documents, we facilitate the process for others by making explanations better understandable. So this is really also a community effort here. The sessions mentioned by Marcos, so as you know, you are already part here now of the Winter Days, and I can see a lot of people are with us here. This is a community effort. This is a thing that, so Winter Days also once a year, but we have other formats, other events that happen frequently where you're invited to join, to ask questions, to raise discussions, to get involved, to see where you are in these 5 steps. And we are always there to be part of this discussion and guide you. Trainings is something that you can find on our webpage, for example, by Fraunhofer, but also other training formats and events are just at the horizon, so that you can, in case you don't want to read all these things on your own and go through the knowledge base and the repositories on your own, you can do this by having a proper training by IDS experts. And also the IDS Expertise portfolio with the already mentioned implementation partners and solution maps. Yeah, so what kind of connectors are already out there? What can I use right away? Where are we asked to contribute? These are things that you also find on our webpage and our GitHub repository. And especially when it comes to the implementation partner community, as I said, this is a community of experts, either because they already went through the process or they contributed to defining key documents of ours, defining processes, legal terms, writing rulebook and reference architecture together with us. Also, being experts on how to implement certain components and how to become part of data spaces. This group is there, and you can make use of it by reaching out directly to these companies that you can find on our webpage, or you can reach out to us so we bring you in contact and do the networking with you. Besides that, IDS communities are something, I mean, you most probably observe the current discussions around data spaces happening not in silos, but in domains. Yeah? So we talk a lot about financial data space, health data space, mobility data space. Yeah? All of these different domains are those who currently drive with a lot of speed currently the data space development. And to give it a home, to give these discussions also a home, especially for those domains where we don't have a thing like the mobility data space for mobility. Yeah? We have communities with us that are driven by members of ours that invite to join the table, to have discussions and have independent opinions on how to bring that forward. Tomorrow we have 2 of them with us on stage. In the afternoon, the health community and also the mobility community will present their agenda, their goals to you, will explain you how to join these communities as a company, as someone who's interested in making things happen for your domain. Yeah? And that is maybe the core melting point for ideas, also for you, where you can find people that are likely minded, or maybe also not, to have interesting discussions. Last but not least, hubs and competence centers are our approach to bring the idea about data spaces to an international level. I mean, we here speak now English, as you know. In Europe, that works very fine. Also, for the rest of the world, it's just okay to get in communication, to get in touch with companies. I already saw friends from Japan here also being with us today. So glad you follow us also. But also, it's a fact that that it's always easier to follow explanations in your mother tongue. So our hubs in different countries all over the world, and currently especially Europe, help companies in a national setup to understand the concept better, to have discussions about national funding, maybe also something that we as head office cannot deliver to you, since, as you know, we are here based in Germany. So for the German and also European perspective, we can lend you a hand. Yeah, to be aware of Japanese funding, what is happening on political level, how can we bring the data space idea forward, it's always a good idea to be in contact with the national hubs. And also here, like Marcos said, we will have a nice session with representatives of the hubs, moderated by Carlos, our colleague from the adoption team. Yeah, basically, this was a long walkthrough through all the things that we did. I'm glad that we have 1.5 days or even more ahead of us. So even if I forgot details, you will have the opportunity to dive into all these different sessions, to get your hands on expert knowledge, to be also in contact with these experts. And I think without further ado, Marcos, do you have final words? Otherwise, I would call Julia here on stage with me again to hand over the moderation for the upcoming sessions.
No, Christoph, thank you very much. And thanks for the audience for staying with us to this journey that went from abstract to complex and back to abstract. So our goal was to introduce you to Winterdays with this session and use these 5 steps as a map for you to know what you will see next and how it relates to the adoption of the standard. So let us have some nice winter days and see you all in all the sessions.
I will go now to the networking session. So let's stay connected. Let's stay in talks. Julia, I hand over to you. Have a nice day. Have nice winter days. See you backstage or on another stage. Goodbye.
Nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Marcos. That was really great. This was the perfect dive into our topics to bring everyone to the same page and also to explain which sessions we've planned for you today. Now, based on the agenda, we have a 5-minute break to let you stretch your legs and grab a coffee. Make sure to come back in time because we have a really interesting session on standardization, the IDS-RAM and also ISO standardization. So I'm really excited about it because we will have new insights on where IDS stands towards the journey for reaching the ISO standard. So meet us back at 11:15 and let's grab a cup of coffee. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our sessions. I hope you managed to grab something to drink and that you're ready to follow us into our next session, which is, I hope we can share the slides again, but that was on standardization. As mentioned, we have a great panel of experts that will guide us through the new reference architecture model, and will also provide some insights on where IDS stands in the path toward ISO. So I'm very happy to welcome on stage Andreas Teuscher. Are you with us? Andreas is Chief Industrial Security Officer at SIG AG and also one of the leaders of our industrial community. There he is. Welcome.
Good morning.
On stage. So I think we can jump directly into the session. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome from my side also. What we presenting in this session here is to give all of you a short introduction of what are the activities with regards to the standardization, especially for the IDS-RAM. Sebastian Steinbuß will get, I will say, a little deep dive in the reference architecture model. Then we have Gerd Brost. He will give a session with regards to what about our plans to have a ISO certified standard for the gateway / connector. And then we have Robin Brandstetter from Fraunhofer Jese, as well as Ray Welch, a specialist in data governance. So let me see who is joining this session. Okay, all three of them are available. Good morning, sirs. Obviously, we have no lady on board, nevertheless. So I will hand over to Sebastian Steinbuß. He will give you a short introduction and maybe some one or two deep dives, small deep dives in the RAM, especially because we are planning to update the RAM in a new version. So I will hand over to Sebastian.
Andreas, thank you so much. Everyone, warm welcome from my side. So happy to be with all of you again to the IDSA Winterdays. So let me try to share my screen briefly. Of course, I brought some slides with me on the reference architecture model and what the current status quo and the next steps is. So, of course, I know that IDSA is world famous for the reference architecture model, but we are working beyond the reference architecture model. And I think you're pretty aware that version 3.0 of the reference architecture model is out there since a while. And now we are moving very, very strong towards a new version, the version 4.0 of the reference architecture model. But we haven't been lazy in the meanwhile. You know, and Andreas asked for a brief introduction to the reference architecture model. So the reference architecture model is a foundation for our work. It describes how data spaces could be built under the conditions that we describe inside IDSA. So describing what is the context, so where do we see data sharing, data exchange while maintaining data sovereignty in business ecosystems and in data-driven ecosystems as a whole. Of course, we describe the business architecture. I think you all know the role model that we described, that of course we have data provider and data consumer, and they should be able to exchange data again, while maintaining data sovereignty. We have a functional perspective describing, so what are the basic requirements to such data spaces as we described. And then we get into the very bare details of the technology, describing how processes look like. We describe the information model, so how can we describe data as an asset, as a tradable asset, which metadata do you need, how can you offer such things using self-description, self-declarations, and how can you negotiate contracts? This is part of the reference architecture. The process is how to exchange data. Again, also using, for example, protocols. And then the system layer, what is the anatomy of a connector? How can you build your own connector under your certain requirements that you have? I mean, data spaces and data are so different in itself. So maybe such connectors could look differently. If I take a look at to Andreas, who's dealing with sensors, or if I take a look at use cases who deal with big data, and so on and so forth. So this, of course, has to be applied, those requirements, to your tangible connector architecture. And that is what we described, basically. But on top of those layers of the reference architecture that we described, there we have the so-called perspectives. A security perspective that describes the security architecture of data spaces of a connector. And this is of utmost importance because this trust and security is a basic foundation for data spaces. And I think Robin will go into the details why trust is so important for usage policies and usage policy enforcement, and how you can enforce usage policy based on a trusted architecture. And the certification perspective, including the certification scheme, is another perspective that is really of more and more importance for us. We've been driving the certification aspect of the certification scheme since years, since the beginning of IDS. And now we're so close to put this really into practice and to provide IDS certification for connectors, for operation environments, so that you can put your data spaces in real life scenarios, really. So the certification scheme then includes third-party conformity assessments. And this assessment is not only paper-based. We need to provide this information about cybersecurity and trustworthiness during runtime as well. And then finally, of course, to support the rise of data spaces, we need things like open source building blocks. Of course, we need closed source solutions that you can easily buy and use, like Marcos and Christoph described before, that there are solutions that are ready to buy and ready to use. But at the same side, we need those open source building blocks to really support the growth of data spaces. The final perspective in the reference architecture model is the governance perspective. And it's limited from a technology point of view. But of course, we have to address the whole thing, the business, legal, operational, functional, and technical agreement. That's why we added the so-called IDSA rulebook with our new working group on the rulebook on top of that. And the important thing is right now that we have to keep all those things that you can see on the screen in sync. If we change one thing, we have to change all the things. And we have set up exactly this structure to come up with a consistent data space architecture. So what's new in reference architecture model 4? As said, we have to keep consistency. For example, we changed the names of the security profiles for the connectors. We have to sync them. We have the rulebook as a new thing. And we have the so-called IDSG. The reference architecture model is a framework, the concepts. In IDSG, we have detailed specifications, how to use the reference architecture model while using protocol and so on and so forth. So this goes on top of the reference architecture model and goes into the details. Of course, we will improve and add details on important aspects like the process layer and the information layer. Of course, those things moved in the recent years and we have to update things accordingly. And we are moving into new concepts, adding new concepts. For example, things everyone is waiting for. Can you use DIDs, verifiable credential presentations, and so on and so forth, and other cloud-based technologies, of course. This is where we strongly collaborate also with Gaia X, for example, to have a coherence of those different architectures. So this is what we are working on. But the question is, of course, how do you work on this? And so we've set up basically a new model for that. We are shifting away from providing a reference every now and then, but to really continuously development and to inclusion of the whole community. That means you can always file a change request if you need something additional in the reference architecture model. If you would see something has to be changed, then you can always issue a change request via our GitHub repositories, and we will take care about this. And then the cycle starts. People start contributing to this issue, we start developing, we start building things, and then we go to the public review inside our community. And of course, the review is done by the working group architecture here, but everyone else is of course welcome to review and to add comments to see that we really come up with good and sustainable concept. And then the task of the IDSA working groups and bodies is a final approval of changes to the reference architecture model, of changes to IDSG, changes to the certification scheme, to the rulebook, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, things will be published. And we are also switching a little bit our publication mechanism. So we are targeting to an online first version, not a paper-based version that is printed. Of course, can have a paper-based and printed version if you would like to, but we have to move faster. So going to an online first version that can be changed more easily or more dynamically. And of course, this requires, again, a triage of the different changes. Do we add a new feature? Is this just a slight improvement, or is it just a correction of the typos? All those things are taken into consideration. And now you're asked, you can be part of this development cycle and the continuous development of all the important artifacts that IDSA provides as an association. But the thing that all of you want to know, what is a tangible schedule? If I show a cycle, then you don't know where we are. We will publish the reference architecture model 4 in April 2022. This is our plan. So we are in the end of our creation phase. People collaborate on content creation, and we're not done with it. So it's still time left until end of February to add issues, to comment on things, and to contribute text, contribute ideas and comments, and so on and so forth. And I encourage all of you, be part of this creation phase. And if you don't want to be part or cannot be part of the creation phase, then please review our things, review the draft that we provide. There will be a draft version available end of February, beginning of March, that can be reviewed as a whole document. We're working on GitHub. This is sometimes hard to step through all the different things, so we'll provide a version that you can review and where you can comment on. And of course, we will start a copy editing process, because if you change in a big document a lot of things, and you have to take care about consistency. This will be our review phase that we will start in March. And then we will have the approval that has to be done by the bodies of the IDSA, mainly the working group of the working group architecture of IDSA. We will meet mid of March for the approval of the draft version, and then layout, publication, final things, finalizing the reference architecture model to publish it then in April. That's our schedule. And if you would love to be part of this, then join us. Go just to our GitHub repositories, international data spaces. There we have a repository for reference architecture model 4. And you can see there is still work to do. 89 open issues, at least yesterday when I prepared the slide. Still 10 open pull requests, so people are not filing in issues. We have also things that have already been worked on. And of course, I will share the links later on to join our GitHub repository. We have our cool knowledge base where you can find out more about IDSA, how we work, and how you can better understand how we're working and what we're doing. As said, you can always file a change request if you need something. Just take the public IDSG repository. We will take care that your issue will be handled by the right person. And of course, call to action, join our development as a reference architecture model 4. That would be my introductory words. And now let's dig a little bit deeper into the content and also what comes beyond reference architecture model 4. What can we do with standardization activities, starting from IDSA, but also collaborating with a lot of other data spaces, standardization activities. And I think with that, back to you, Andreas.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So we have several other topics which will be discussed in this track. I'm not sure who will be the next speaker of the subcontent. Is it Robin or Ray or Robin? Okay, I will hand it over to you. Thank you. Robin, the stage is yours.
So, thank you and welcome to the session. I will talk about a little bit the reference architecture model and usage control and what we will change. First of all, a little bit about me, because I'm not that well known as you are. My name is Robin Brandstätter. I'm from the Fraunhofer Jese. I'm a senior security engineer there. And I work on topics like enforcement of usage control, specification, privacy of data, and I'm also developing software. In the IDS, I do software engineering and meanwhile also project management. So come to the reference architecture model. What we will improve is the terminology across all over the document, because we find out that we have a different terminology, and we will try to be more constant to be easier to understand. Also, we had a usage control 3 document delivered, and we will try to align processes and everything to this document. And we will go in more detail for specification and processes regarding usage control. This means the policy description and what Sebastian mentioned already, the negotiation and the enforcement. To start a little bit, it's, I think, important to have some knowledge what usage control is. So a definition of usage control is given here. It's taken out of the reference architecture model version 3, and it is not changing. So it's usage control is an addition to access control. So access control is still a part of it, and we have to focus on both parts. So, but even if you gave somebody access to data, we will try to control still the data and have some obligations on it and fulfill them. An example here is from access control to attribute-based access control to usage control. So these arrows are showing some steps in it. So first of all, you try an example to reach a document, but before you can get just the access, which is maybe just access control, you can have a role check, which means it's a role-based access control, like are you an IDSA member? Yes, or you could additionally give some context or attributes, which is attribute access control. Though it could be something you are located in Germany, your security policies are up to date, your application context is education. But even if you grant access, you could apply some control on it. So you could say you could access the data, but only for 3 days. And therefore you have after the access, you have to take some control. You could also do some actions like, yes, you inform an owner, or even if the access was not granted, you can report an incident. So here is a little bit more technical detail, what components are used in usage control to solve the given issue. So the first thing is the entry point. It's a policy execution point. It's hooked into data flow or a control flow, and then is connected to the brain, the policy decision point, which taking decisions. In these decision points, you usually hold the policies and the information what you have to fulfill. Additional components like the policy information point give during this policy evaluation some information about external information. It could be something like that the weather is nice. Andrea, there's an example. Or it could be something for today is an event. Here, today is the event of the IDS Winterdays. And during this time, if this event is ongoing, you have some access or something like this. The policy execution point is also an additional component, which is executing then some action, whatever. It could be just a logging, it could send an email, it could print something, it could inform something, it could send a push message, and so on. And there are also components to bring policies to the policy decision point. One thing is a policy administration point, which is more or less an editor, where you can administrate the policies, and a system for policy management, which then brings the policies to this PDP. And all this is really linked to ACML, which is a standardization in this area of access control and also used for usage control. So what's new in the reference architecture model 4? We bring in here for the specification more details about IDS contracts and define them in a more fine-grained way. What the IDS contract is, what a usage control policy is. It's a part of this contract. And we also give information about the IDS policy language and the policy classes we have. So there is a part of this metadata which is not really changing overall, but during the negotiation, you negotiate usually about the usage control policy part, because these are the rules and the statements for permission, prohibition, and obligations. And you have to fulfill them. The next part we are describing more details is the IDS contract negotiation. During this negotiation process, you have to fulfill some things, and we still talking about and have some issues, but I think we are nearly at the goal. And what is also challenging is that you are precise enough that it's not misunderstandable, but you leave some degree of freedom for some implementation. So, but I think we are on a good way there. The next thing we are describing in more details are the processes for policy enforcement. I think they were not described so much, but we also describe them with an alignment to the usage control 3 and also newer things. And we will give here more information how this process can be done, but there's also the same challenge that you do not want to give too much details that you are not free for your implementation. But the general ideas will be given, and also the components which I presented before will describe then how they can be used. What's really completely new, I think, it's about context and this execution, which I explained, which is a PIP and a PXP. We will give information how to achieve, or how you can achieve information, and we separate them in two different context information points. Like you have local information, which can be resolved inside of your IDS connector, or you could also have IDS global context information, which means you can give as a data provider also an implementation where the consumer have to get this information. It could be something like what I explained, these events, which events are ongoing. And there's also something about then this execution points, that you have IDS local execution points, which means them logging information, an example, or you can give some global execution point. That means you make an execution like send an email to this address, or you have a messaging service where you can add this. Or if you think about that you can log something on a server, an external server, and you can also describe this in general, or you can give as a provider, especially the information, use this. And these interfaces will be standardized. This is what we are currently also implementing and trying to do. And yeah, what our future work is, what I already mentioned, this implementation of this context, but we are going also in the direction of cloud solutions with existing cloud services. We're trying to get all these concepts running in this cloud area. And what we also started working on to get more fine-grained usage control, which is named like UC-aware apps, that you could implement this PEP also in applications, that you could have more control over the data. And yeah, which is a good point to start with is the IDS Plugfest, which is on March 1st, 2022. I think we will also have a discussion here about sharing data and the edges when you maybe use control, and how to maybe still keep control, and what kind of sharing we offer. Okay, that was it from my side. I think next would be Gert.
So thank you very much, Robin. Gert, are you available? You have to unmute.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much. So, Gerd, the stage is yours.
Okay, perfect. So let me try to share. I got this weird effect on here. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. As I've been already quickly introduced, my name is Gerd Post. I'm working for Fraunhofer ISAC, and we are an institute totally occupied with IT security on all different layers, and we are also a long-term player in the IDS. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the our current ISO standardization roadmap and the idea to standardize the Germany based DIN spec 27070 emerging from the IDS activities so far. And I'm going to show you our roadmap and invite everyone to join. So where we are is we want to create we want to define a security framework for a data and service exchange gateway. This is what the DIN spec is already about, and this is what we're also going to take as a starting point for ISO standardization. And we are going to we're trying to establish a set of standards that work for multiple application domains and create a living ecosystem that also follows internationally accepted standards. So what we have already is this shortly mentioned DIN spec 27070. For everyone not from Germany and not involved in the DIN thing, the DIN is the German Standardization Council. So the DIN are German industry standards, and the DIN spec is like a lightweight, faster approach that only takes 2 years, which is pretty quick for standardization. And the idea is to take this, what is already there. We also have a translation, and it's also linked on the IDSA homepage. We have this since last year now. And this is just the starting stone or the cornerstone of our standardization activities. It's called a reference architecture of a security gateway for exchange of industrial data and services. And as most who are already a little bit familiar with the certification aspects, we have like 3 security we have like a base variant where we say, okay, military security features are in there. We have a trust variant, which is the baseline set of features we require for usage control enforcement. And this is pretty much the baseline for the enforcement what Robin just presented. And we have the Trust Plus gateway, which is one step above, also linking to trusted execution environments and confidential computing as an example, because here we want to achieve something that cannot even be manipulated by a malicious administrator as an example. So this is basically the highest protection profile. So if we dig what we did so far, we took these ISO ISC 62443, which is like a set of standards for security requirements for industrial automation and control systems. And it's one of the most advanced security standards in the industry so far because it's really comprehensive, it's really well defined. The requirements are well defined. So we took this as a cornerstone, especially since we started with the industrial application domain, because then this was the most evolved one. And we focused very much on the -4-2, which isn't important here, but important is we focused on the network component. So we defined the gateway as a network device and derive our security requirements from there. What you can see in the small table below is we do mapping of the different security levels to our trust profiles. And as you can see here, this table only tells a little bit of the truth because some aspects are missing, some aspects don't really fit into the IDS ecosystem, and especially when it comes to dynamic trust engagement, there are many things to still be wanted. So we had to build this on top somehow, but the 62443 was a very good starting point and a cornerstone for that. So we think many initiatives would really benefit from a baseline standard that really takes these kind of data exchange ecosystems into account and really focuses also on security. I'm very happy, and I think we all are, that currently this whole IDSA drive found its way also to EU funding schemes. We have a lot of calls currently coming up regarding data spaces. We have this Gaia-X approach. We have many different verticals. So we think this is really what needs to be done, because a standard, even if it's somehow a little bit tedious and can appear very, very boring from the outside, and the process to create such a standard can be very long and cost a lot of effort. I think this is required to get the traction over different application domains. To achieve this, we want to go deeper into the security profiles and really create an abstract data exchange gateway for different applications domains, which also means we need a platform that we can build upon. And this platform needs to be flexible. It should be possible to have like a monolithic gateway, to have a cloud deployment, everything of that, to also have modularized approaches. But we need this kind of trusted platform, or multiple facets of that. To build this trust, we need remote integrity verification, we need data provenance, we need integrity validation, all the promises we try to make with the IDS aspects, especially also in the higher trust profiles. And we need what we know. We need what's essential for this kind of data services. We need discovery. We need trust negotiation, exchange of data usage policies, dynamic trust establishment. We want to achieve transparency. We want to enable information flow and data usage control, like what we heard before, and also we want to enable privacy-aware data processing change. So this is a lot of different goals, and this is a lot to do. We are aware of that, and we're happy we already did some preliminary work with the Dienstag before. And if we currently go, what we all know, this ecosystem, which was very colorful, we have very nice, or a lot of very nice concepts. We really dug into IDS specs. We have this IDSG that really cares how the protocols work, how the connectors connect, how we work with the identity provider, with this dynamic attribute provisioning service we already have. We have this app store, we have the broker, you all know all of these components. We have the clearinghouse, the interactions between there. We have the possibility to deploy apps, and we have this very nice, well-established scheme. And if you go for standardization, it obviously gets very, very boring and very frustrating, because you have to strip all of this down, remove all of this IDS specifics, and just boil down to a core where everyone can agree upon, and focus on some abstract architecture, which looks rather bleak, unfortunately. But this is what it comes down if you're going for standardization. So you need some kind of abstract gateway, some abstract components. You need to if you go for this ISO standardization, not like RFCs of the IETF, then you more focus on the requirements to set up the overall system, and the implementation is second. So everyone should be free to implement it the way they deem to be the most suitable. We're just specifying the requirements, and this is why it gets like this. It's not only monochromatic because the standards require this for printability and all of that, but it's also a little bit monochromatic because some of the flavors of the IDS have to be cut down a little bit, but try to bring in our ideas and what we want to achieve. So Same with the overall gateway architecture, the different ideas we have with the different protocols, policy negotiation. We try to synthesize the ideas from that, transform it to requirements, bring it into some abstract target architecture, even if it again looks very boring, but we try to get the best out of that and bring our ideas into standardization. So we need a lot of additional requirements to this DIN spec and to the 62443 I briefly mentioned. We need more. We need to go towards communication security, this information model, so we have a common language every component knows about. We need to match our identity and access management concepts to that. We need this metadata broker integrated. You pretty much aware of the most important topics already, I guess, but this is where we want to go. And yeah, we really want to go into a full set of standards. We're going to start with the gateway, but we need to extend this to bring an ecosystem into life, because it's not only the gateway, it's also the interaction. It's interaction with infrastructure components. It's different sets of standards of rules, how to work together, how to find each other, how to establish trust. So this is the long-term goal. And yeah, the short-time goal in standardization, which is always a little bit demotivating at the beginning. If you look at the time frame, we are currently starting somewhere in 22. There's going to be some ballots in the different norming panels. We are going to have a lot of negotiation with different entities. We do a lot of politics to present our approaches, to get some other companies to join us. We need international negotiation of what we want to achieve. And then we are going into content development, start the project if we got the approval. And then we go into commenting, translation, and finally we're going to have a finalized DIN spec. But this might take as long as 24, 25. But at least we got everything set up. We got the stage prepared and are now going to work on that. Please join us. So we are currently building a consortium, finding other players who are going to support us. Feel free to contact me or Andreas, and we are going to go full forward. Andreas and me were working on the DIN spec. We are going to continue this tech team also for the ISO, and I'm excited, and I hope, even if it's standardization, some of you might also get excited and involved. So thank you, and I'm going to give back to Andreas.
Thank you very much, Gert. And now I will hand over to Ray. Ray, I think it's also good to have a short introduction about your personal as well as the topic what you are introducing. Thank you. You have to unmute. You have to unmute first. You're still on the mute.
I have the mute button. It was hidden behind my slides. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
Excellent topic. Thanks very much, Andreas. I'm going to have to jump on your teams, I think, now based on my presentation. Yeah, my background is I've been working in the area of international standardization for emerging technology for the last 15 years or so now, I suppose. I work for the Adapt Research Centre in Dublin City University, and I've been working on cloud, big data, AI, smart cities standards with ISO IEC, Joint Technical Committee, and with the European Commission, with ETSI and Senelec, and various other committees as well. In relation to this, in relation to data spaces, my primary work is with the Big Data Value Association, the standardization group there, and we're actually also working on data space standards. So really have to talk to Andreas and Gert as a matter of urgency, because we've a similar process in Clay, and we probably need to collaborate on that. Yes, so in relation to the really good, from Sebastian's really good reference architecture presentation as well, I was involved in the big ISO IEC GHC1's big data reference architecture, which came out of Working Group 9, the Big Data Working Group, which is now part of SC42, the Artificial Intelligence Committee. of ISO IEC. Under Working Group 2 under Wo Chang. Anyway, what I want to do is sort of set the context of where all of this sort of sits in relation to the various entities, so not just IDSA, but also other perspectives. So to get there's already been excellent presentations, like prior to by Gert and Sebastian. So on the technical end of things, so I'm going to go look at more of the the sort of context, I suppose, aspect of it. So different views of data spaces, data spaces from a European perspective, but primarily from our involvement through IDSA and BDVA standards and GAIA-X, etc., is guided by European values. And most organizations at this stage are looking at technical standards for data spaces, like not just within Europe, but elsewhere as well. And from my view, from what I'd like to bring to the picture is some of the work we're doing within BDVA, which is on metadata. Now, metadata is the basis for data space interoperability, because if you're not informed, if you don't know what the data about data is, it's very hard to create the environment for federated data sharing and for data sharing in general. So you can have the best security, best privacy preserving technology, but if you don't know what you're doing, what you're exchanging, you can't make real use. So utility, and obviously there's always a trade-off between privacy and utility, but making utility out of the data, you need to understand the data. And like is looking at different perspectives of where the data is in relation to context and definitions of data, etc. We're talking about information. We're talking about the processing and analytics of associated with data collection and validation, acquisition, operations that can be carried out on data. So whether they're mathematical based, like in our logical data sets, data lakes, extracting meaning, so semantics from data. And then metadata, like, so the one that I want to have a look at, like, is the data about data, and talk about that towards the end. We're all about, and IDSA is all about connecting data systems, like, so bringing data communication together, like, facilitating the sharing in a controlled and manner, and not just from a technical perspective, but also bringing, as I said, the EU values to the data sharing. So looking at it from a bias and from an ethics, from a transparency point of view, as well as from a security point of view. So we're looking at exchange of information, but for mutual use, so that you have this interoperability. That means that where there's utility lost, and then data portability as well, like, so transferring data without having to a major overhaul of the data, so to make it fit for purpose for other systems. Data spaces, then there's lots of talk about data spaces, and obviously the International Data Spaces Association is in the center of all of this. But looking at it from different perspectives, you have OpenDI, like looking at data spaces as an integration concept, a federated data ecosystem with certain application domains. The position papers by the BDVA, the Big Data Value Association, looked at it from an ecosystem of data from a whole slew of areas, like models and ontologies and contracts and management services, but also to support a federated virtual space connecting several other interoperable spaces. So, which is very in line with the reference architecture from IDSA. And then IDSA itself, obviously, it's a model for data integration, distributed network of data endpoints, and breaking it down through the connector system, like to make it scalable and modular. GAIA-X, then, if you bring GAIA-X into the picture, then you have this virtual data integration concept again with GAIA-X, and no atomic common data schema, which maps very closely to the IDSA reference architecture model. But one data ecosystem, but where several data spaces can emerge. So again, that structure is supported by the IDSA reference architecture model. Then we have the GAIA-X technical architecture, which describes it as been leveraging existing standards. So we have interconnection, which leverages the existing standards, open technology and concepts for data exchange and services, and interoperability and interconnection, again, the buzzword. So it's all about this interconnection, interoperability, and for data as well as services. So that gives us this view then that we have the system of systems, and this is taking the IEEE ISO IEC a view on this stuff in the 21839 document, which you have the systems themselves can have their own operational environments, and they can share information between them, but you can also have this constituent system, which is this constituent system viewpoint, which doesn't have its own operational environment itself, but actually it just links together other operational environments. So this gives you an opportunity to view things as a system of systems. So we need to always be thinking about scaling and not breaking any interoperability as we scale up, and still having that semantic information been passed from a metadata perspective as we go up the food chain. And as you build upon like existing system capabilities, and these can be data systems themselves, and then you're linking them together with they have their own inputs and outputs, their own capabilities, but you also get the system of systems unique inputs, because it's a combination of an amalgamation of inputs to other systems producing other outputs. But the disadvantage of that is if you have bigger systems, then you also are exposing potential system of system risks. So looking at the linkages from the connectors between the various subsections from a user view and from a functional view at the architecture level is quite important, so that we don't that we have, as I said, we have the scalability, but we are not exposing ourselves to other emergent risks, or at least dealing with them and identifying them. And then we have the concept of privacy and metadata then. So look, if we're going to do some sort of privacy management, then we have data processing and metadata processing, privacy, and then we have this, what's the metadata passing between the various sub blocks, like, you know, so that you have to give configure your privacy preference and give permission, you know, to certain capabilities, building blocks, functional components within the architecture, and to control this sharing of the data between the citizen and the data processing. So by specifying privacy preferences, so that you can have you can maximize your utility, but minimizing your exposure in terms of privacy. And there's lots of systems that are looking at this at the moment in terms of privacy and metadata. So to look at it in terms of data lifecycle, there's lots of things happening, and these are all extracts from our current document that we're working on with BDVA, looking at interoperability and a reference architecture for data spaces. And we're looking at data space lifecycle evolution, looking at the management of the lifecycle as it evolves, interoperability issues, you know, in reuse and collaboration and analysis, and then trust. You know, trust has its own set of issues when it comes to data sharing. And I'm particularly myself interested in the data governance, the data and the data governance aspect of the trust, but also the other people are looking at, and it's also mentioned in the IDSA presentations already on the technology organizations and people perspectives as well. But from data and data governance perspective, then this data will be working group 2 from SC42, ISO working group, and data governance is SC40, and I'm chairing or convening a working group within SC40, which is the IT governance ISO committee, and the lead of their governance of data work on the working group 1. Interoperability layers, then we need to be cognizant that there's a stack here that we need to be aware of in looking at the infrastructure. So established communication infrastructure for transport, formats of the exchange information from a syntactic point of view, the meaning of the data model, so from a semantic point of view, expected outcomes been achieved from a behavioral point of view, and then also the policy interoperability, because you have legal and organization policy frameworks which are applied across these systems as well. And then you have metadata in data spaces, where this is coming from the IDS connector system as well, like, you know, from your own architecture, and you can still see here that you have metadata being exchanged between brokers and connectors as well. So metadata interoperability, and this is a quote directly from your own documents, is the IDSA information model has minimal domain agnostic set of metadata concepts. So that makes it workable, and it's based on W3ID. .org IDSA, the data space information model as linked there. You've also done a mapping to the Gaia-X architecture, so you can see where the functional components that are identified within the IDSA architecture also map to the various components of Gaia-X, so from identity and trust and federated catalog, and sovereign data exchange like clearinghouse and usage control, and then compliance with certification bodies. And at the infrastructure ecosystem level with service provider, app store provider, app provider, etc. So you can see where there's an overlay possible, which means that the European perspective in relation to these data sharing architectures are not a million miles apart. And based on this breakdown, then we can actually look towards standardization based on, I mean, we were talking, Gert introduced it already in terms of the ISO approach, is that you have to take a very functional view of this, which is to break down the IDSA architecture into its building blocks in a reference or standardized or generalized approach. And this last part I want to just highlight is that looking at use cases can be very useful in this instance. So we're looking at in our work on the data spaces, looking at the sort of different solutions for different problems and what the benefits are, and then what type of architecture or metadata standards are required for that. So here's the agriculture one from Belgium, the renewable energy from France use cases. And what I like about taking a use case approach to developing a standard and a standard approach from an international level is that it takes lots of different perspectives across Europe, in our instance, to look at the outputs of what the data space is going to be, and then looking at what the functional components of the data spaces would be, and to make a generalized architecture based on these use cases. So you can actually derive technical requirements and technical specifications from these use cases and build them into international standards, like as what happened with the 20543 suite of standards, the big data reference architecture standards. And there's also other ones across health and across industry, and a lot of these reference the IDSA architecture as well in terms of possible mappings to those individual architectures. Smart living is the last one. So just want to quickly go through this to leave time for at the end for discussion, and then just to talk about the work for. I've already had discussions with SC42 in relation to this work already, and a colleague of mine we're working together in BDVA, Antonio Kun, is one of the leadership of SC41, which is the IoT, Internet of Things and Digital Twins group. And SC40, of course, because I'm involved in the data governance perspective with ISO, IEC, GFC1, SC40, but also SC27, as Gert was talking about earlier, like, because this is the security aspect of this. And what we're looking at from our point of view is the proposal for a new work item in data spaces family of standards. And this is not just from a security perspective, like, from making our work technically from an authentication and authorization point of view, but getting the language correct. So terms and definitions for data spaces and use cases, so that we get the ecosystem of all the main areas of interest to suppliers with their use cases, so we can collate them together to have a standard set of use cases that can be used to derive a reference architecture for data spaces, and also an application framework for the applied element, which was one of the suite of documents created through the big data reference architecture. And then there's data spaces data governance, which may be specific to data spaces, but in general terms, it tends to be data oriented. So there's possibilities in the future then of creating joint working groups between ISO, International Standards Organization, and the Industrial Electrical Commission, IEC, through their Joint Technical Committee 1. It was so good that they only had one, GHC1. And these are the various subcommittees. So 42 is AI, 41 is IoT, 27 for security, 40 for governance, and 38 is cloud computing. They all would have interest in this data spaces ecosystem, and others, but these are the ones that I have good linkages with at the moment. So that just sets a scene, I suppose, which puts some of the IDSA work in perspective, and Sebastian and Sylvia are already working with me on this work with the Big Data Value Association, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate on this going forward, so that we push the European view on this out to the international ISO committees in the short to medium term future. Thanks very much for your time, and I can pass you back now to the main session.
Thank you very much, Ray. Maybe we can have a small talk with regards to the standardization in data spaces. And if some of you have questions with regards to the IDS-RAM or the certification, you can join now the stage, and or you can have also a chat with us. Please feel free to contact us now. Are there any questions? If you put your question, please, in the chat, then we can discuss it here. No questions at all. I will make a remark on the presentation. Thank you very much for all of you, for the presenter. Here's one from Hans-Marius Schuster. How to define new data spaces? I don't know if this is a question which is based on the RAM or the standardization. I think it's more a question to
more philosophical, I think.
Yes, it's a good one. I don't know. You mean different data spaces? I want to create H2.
Is that hydrogen?
Okay.
Well, I think the first answer is, yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, keep going, keep starting. And you're completely right here within the winter days. I mean, from this session that we had just here, together with all of you, of course, you can just start using the IDS reference architecture model, but what also Ray highlighted. So it's not only IDSA doing data spaces. There are others as well, other systems, other concepts that target to the same direction. So you have to understand what is the technology you want to start with. So I understood it's hydrogen, but I don't know if there is really a hydrogen-powered data space. But of course, you can use it. So the one thing is a technology perspective. But I hope you also saw the presentation that we had from Christoph and Marcos before on those 5 steps how to build data spaces. So maybe you have to start from the business perspective first. So what is the ecosystem you're discussing about? So, of course, I'm a computer scientist. I love to answer, choose this box, and you feel you're good to go. But I'm afraid this can't be the answer. Think about your ecosystem. How do you connect to each other? What is the data aspect? Which data do you want to share? What are the rights and obligations or the conditions under that you want to share the data? I mean, Robin presented it very well. So basically, it's easy. You put a condition on the data, then you share the data, and the other system enforces the usage policies. Well, the devil is in the detail. It's not that easy at all when you dig into the details. So feel free to join us here and to listen to all the expertise that all of the people have here, because there are so many things to consider. And I think you're well connected here, starting with Boris Otto, definitely, but also with all the others here today. We are exactly in the same position. We want to build data spaces, and we want to start right now.
I think that's a good explanation. Thank you, Sebastian.
Yeah, I think the starting point for me always is the community. If you can put a community of like-minded people together who are interested in a particular area, and in this case, obviously, it's the fuel cells and hydrogen, then that's the starting point. It has to be some sort of a rationale behind why do you want to build a data space? Who is going to benefit from it? Like, it has to be some endpoint. And then it's about putting a load of expertise across, ideally distributed, across the globe, somehow, because then we can use this large-scale architecture to bring them together in a controlled and collaborative manner, to create your data space.
Okay, good. I think we have how many times? Two minutes to go. I think we will leave this session. Thank you very much for the speaker, and we go to the next session, which is Rulebooks for the data space. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot to everyone. Yeah, as mentioned, now we will have a session on Rulebooks. Before that, I would really like to remind everyone about the pillars of IDSA, because I thought it's a really good point to make to really guide you through the next sessions. So the first pillar of IDSA is unlimited interoperability. So what we mean with that, exactly these standardization aspect that we just saw. How we can make all kinds of different endpoints interoperable with each other. The second pillar is trust, which was also mentioned by Sebastian before. So we want to ensure trust within data spaces, and for this, IDSA provides a certification scheme. If you're interested on this topic, make sure to join tomorrow's session at 10:45, because we will exactly go deeper into this topic. And the last pillar is governance. With governance, we actually mean 2 aspects. One is governance of the data, which we also covered in the session before, so the topic of data usage control and how we can ensure data usage mechanisms. But the second aspect and the second perspective on governance is indeed the governance of the data spaces. We all know this data space concept is something really complex. We have plenty of players in data spaces which interact in different ways. So we absolutely want some rules to be able to govern data spaces. This is why we need rulebooks. And having said that, I'm happy to welcome our presenters today. Marco will be the moderator. Marco Turpainen is CEO of 1001 Lakes and also head of our newly formed rulebook working group. So happy to have you on stage. If you remember, Marco, we met each other almost 2 years ago, indeed, to start collaborating on the first version of the rulebook. So that was great, and I'm glad to have you on stage today.
Thank you, Julia. And let's see, I'll just put my presentation in full screen. Here we go. And that. So I hope you can see it fine now. So my name is Marko Turpainen. As Julia said, I'm really happy to be here. This session is about rulebooks, and as Julia said, so we have a new rulebook working group in IDSA, and I've been selected as the chair. So in many ways, feeling very much ownership also of where this topic is going within the framework of IDSA, and then I really encourage everybody to participate in this session, because it's really about finding the ways to figure out the rules for all of us when we are sharing data, when we are getting these data ecosystems going, when we are making the data spaces happen. So let's start by once more this question or putting out this whole story of why rulebooks, and as we started this whole day today by emphasizing trust and ensuring trust in data spaces. So it is really important that we have these mechanisms, these tools, these things that guide us to jointly agree on the governance side of data spaces. So we need these multi-party governance schemes. And the idea with the rulebook is actually multifold or multi-leveled. So it works at 4 different levels. So first of all, it can help in guaranteeing interoperability in data space approaches, within data spaces and also between data spaces. And IDSA and IDSA's rulebook that I will introduce in a second is an example of that. Then at the second level, so you can think of rulebooks as a way to, for any data space initiative, any data space, any network that's sharing data, to figure out their specific rules for that particular activity, that ecosystem, those use cases that they are involved in. And you can build a rule book for that. So it's a tool for the ecosystems to clarify what are the different aspects that has to do with governing the data space. Then it can also be seen as a way when people are building commercial offerings that support data spaces. Well, okay, so for the second one, actually, so going back there, so we will have an excellent presentation by Bauke from InnoPay on the data sharing canvas approach on how to do the second one. On the third one, so you can think of this as a way to help commercial offerings, commercial players to figure out rules between themselves, but also making sure that in the longer term there is a basis on which they can build their commercial offering, and that's then brought up by Mika Huhtamäki from Vastu Group. And then the fourth aspect is that the rule books can actually be a way as a kind of a gateway and a tool to help in defining what those data usage control mechanisms that we just heard about related to the reference architecture actually are. So and in even then building automated ways from the contracts that have been agreed on that are part of the rule book to the technical implementation and automated data sharing contracts. And that's what we will hear from Matthias de Biefre. So as said, we will have 4 excellent presentations, hopefully mine as well. So Bauke after me, Mika, and then Matthias de Biefre from Visions. And then the last part is questions and answers, joint brainstorming discussions amongst all of us. I have a bit of an interactive exercise there for us to also to go through related to rulebooks. So that's the agenda for this session. You already saw this picture presented by Sebastian, and so the IDSA rulebook has been in preparation for some time already, and there is a version already out there, which is something that we will build upon. But those different aspects of what rulebook actually then involves, so guaranteeing interoperability, holistic governance, and these commercial offerings, as I mentioned before. So the IDSA rulebook working group really tries to make these steps forward so that we can, in all of these different aspects and the automation of the activities can happen. So it's part of this sort of the magic triangle of what IDSA is driving at. And more specifically, so the mission for the rulebook working group is that, well, first of all, it's open for every IDSA member, so please join us. Then it oversees the development of the IDSA's own rulebook, and more about that in a second. And then it's also linked with whatever IDSA wants to come up with more handbook type processes. So this is how-to guides. So those are the operational handbooks. Rulebooks is more sort of what's allowed, what's not allowed, or what are the contracts behind. And then we also want to be very much aligned with other efforts that are looking into this issue, and there are several teams, several efforts under the programs that we already heard about, but also so we don't want that this is a fragmented effort. We want be one of those actors that really align different groups that are working on rulebooks. And then interoperability between data spaces, of course, is kind of the ultimate goal for all of us, and rulebooks can help there, and it can be one of the instruments to reach that goal. It will not solve that problem alone, of course not, but we see that this is an important component when we talk about often things that may not be the kind of the technical issues. Technology is involved in rulebooks, but you have the whole spectrum of what's needed when you go really defining the governance model. As far as the IDSA rulebook, so that really contains the functional, technical, operational, and legal agreements that IDS is specifying, and what sort of are the rules of IDSA as an organization, and how can you really take up IDS technologies? How do you what are the rules in terms of, for example, certification? And so there are direct connections to the certification scheme, the RAM work that's ongoing in the rulebook work. And also as an industry standard, as IDS wants to be, so the rulebook is really sort of the basis to govern or steer that. There already exists the first version of the rulebook, and then we are working on the new versions. You can obviously find this on IDSA's website. And again, why do we need this? So there are these several different layers where you have activities that are defined by different documents, by different activities around IDSA, but the rulebook really kind of brings all of these different aspects together, and is more kind of giving those specific guidelines on how IDS activities are being set up, how do you certify your activities, and what is sort of the link between the different activities that IDSA is driving, including the open source activities. And so the rulebook really is looking at, from IDSA's point of view, if we have this sort of layered structure of data spaces. So it really is looking mostly into what's happening at the let's say the building block levels on the interoperability side, on the trust side, on the data value side, on the governance side. This actually is a categorization of 4 different categories of building blocks that was in the design principles for data spaces paper, where IDSA was participating quite a bit. So we need to figure out the essential services and helping different actors, and then making it clear that these are the services that can be used when you build the federated data space solutions. And then in the end, you will also enable this networking of data spaces, networking of ecosystems. And again, the RAM is a tool for that, the certification is a tool for that, but so is also the rulebook. So there are functional agreements as part of the IDSA. So what are the different roles of actors? How does the organization IDSA itself support different activities? Who owns the different schemes that are part of IDS? The technical agreements, how is IDS-RAM being developed? Who is sort of looking after the certification? And how is interoperability testing and compliance done? Then there are the administrative agreements, like the handbook, and so how to build operating IDS implementations, and what are the different rights and duties of IDSA members and the companies that are involved. And then there are the different maintenance agreements on how to have this sort of life cycle management of IDS better in control, and what are the different open source contributions, and how do you bring in different versions of open source contributions as part of, let's say, what IDSA is supporting, and so forth. And then legal agreement templates also, which can be guidance then towards, okay, you want to have your IDS set up, so this is a basis for you to start with. So that's the IDSA rulebook. I also quickly want to mention here another example. So we in Finland worked on something called Sitra's Fair Data Economy rulebook, which is more about this generic template when you have any network, any data sharing ecosystem that is out there. So what are the aspects that needs to be decided at the level of the ecosystem or the data sharing network? And there are different aspects, so business aspects, technical aspects, legal aspects, ethical aspects that are covered in this rulebook template. And it also has contractual framework. So there are model contracts. Well, when you have a multi-party situation, so you can take the model contracts and kind of tailor them to your specific use cases and so forth. So the template is openly available. So it's one tool that is out there. And again, what we are trying to bring together also with other initiatives in this rulebook working group activities, and one of them is data sharing canvas. So I stop here and happy to answer questions if there are any, but I think it's now good time to hand over to Bauke Rietveld from InnoPay, because you are kind of the father of the data sharing canvas. So go ahead, Bauke.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Yes. Yeah, thank you, Marco, for the introduction. As Marco mentioned, I'm a consultant at InnoPay, but I'll be presenting here mostly with my Data Sharing Coalition hat on, presenting the work we did in the Canvas, what it is, the context around it, and how it can be applied to any data sharing context. Yeah, in very brief, the 3 key takeaways I want to give you all about the Data Sharing Canvas is that the Data Sharing Canvas covers all identified topics which are relevant for data sharing. So not only governance, but also digital identities, legal, metadata, etc., etc. in the Canvas, each of these topics are explored to determine the relevance and implication of those topics to scalable, interoperable data sharing. And as I'll present, the data sharing Canvas was initially made from a cross-domain data sharing perspective, but the insights from it can be applied to any data sharing context, if it's a single small use case or if it's a large-scale domain or cross-domain initiative. So what the Canvas is built on, it's built on the fact that we already see that data is already being shared within domains through different agreements. And we all know that data sharing is more than only the technical side of things, the technical interoperability, but you also need agreements on a number of other topics, such as business model, governance, legal agreements, the 9 building blocks you see here on the left. And so we see that in a lot of domains, these building blocks have already been, there are already agreements made on each of these building blocks to enable data sharing in them. And some examples of data sharing domains are shown here on the right. I realize now these are very much Dutch-based examples, but I'm sure you all know some data sharing initiatives in your own context. And so as the Data Sharing Coalition, we aim to really think about cross-domain data sharing. So we already see that within a domain, data sharing is already organized, but once you try to, we see that there's much more value in data if you can share this data across your domain. So from no longer within your specific domain or sector, but if you can also share it over those boundaries, it really unlocks more value of data. And that's our end goal as the Data Sharing Coalition. But then we already immediately walk into a challenge that sharing data across domains is often difficult because each domain has a different domain-specific implementation of these required building blocks. And because of that, you can't seamlessly share data across them. So to give a bit of an example, if you have a certain domain a certain domain where data sharing is organized in one way, you can't necessarily share data with a other domain. As an analogy, maybe this whole session is a good analogy. For me, working in the Data Sharing Coalition, I often talk Dutch. We use Microsoft Office and Teams to communicate. But maybe Marco, in his situation, he talks Finnish with his colleagues. He might use Google Docs for working together and use Zoom for his calls. So you see, those are already 3 different building blocks that each of us have realized in a different way. And because of that, we can't, if we try to do our own thing, we can't really interact with each other. So we need agreements on how you can then interact across these domains with each other. So that's not only to make the actual interoperability, but also to facilitate the trust needed. And that is done in this IDS Winterdays session by saying, okay, we will, for this session, we use Hopin, we all talk English, etc. And through agreements like that, you can suddenly start sharing data across domains where that's previously not possible. So as I mentioned, as the Data Sharing Coalition, our end goal is to have a trust framework for cross-domain data sharing in 2025, and the so this trust framework for cross-domain data sharing should have these common agreements that allow for cross-domain data sharing. And the Canvas, but before we can do that, we need to see, is it even possible to harmonize these different building blocks across the domains? And that is really, so is it possible, is it feasible to make agreements on each of these building blocks in a way that people from different domains all can understand and all agree with to become interoperable with each other? And that's where the data sharing Canvas plays a role. So in the Canvas, we really explored all of these topics. Is it possible to make agreements on them? Really as an initial step towards a future trust framework to enable cross-domain data sharing. We made the canvas with an expert group of 25 experts within the data sharing coalition from various companies. We used different use cases that the data sharing coalition supports to gain insights and analyzed in existing data sharing domains to see what we can learn there. And the result of that is the canvas, which contains, as I mentioned, all the relevant topics, and so the building blocks we saw, plus a few extra that we identified along the way to be relevant. And for each of the topics, it already gives an idea of, is it relevant for data sharing in general, for cross-domain data sharing, and what type of agreements are needed to enable interoperable data sharing. So covers topics like terms and conditions, identification, authentication, authorization, information security, data standards, governance, etc. And the canvas is an extensive document, but it's freely available to anyone online who wants to see what considerations there are on these topics. And again, so these are the canvas is focused around cross-domain data sharing, but because of how generic data sharing is, you can apply it to any data sharing context. Yeah, that was what I wanted to quickly tell you about the canvas. If there's any questions about that, feel free to ask. And else, I think I give the floor to Mika.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bauke. And any questions? I don't see anything in the chat right now. Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. True, it's very impressive. But why don't we then move to Mika Huhtamäki? So Mika comes from also a colleague from Finland, so from Vastu Group, and has been very active in the field of metadata and my data and my data operators. So Mika, take it from here.
Yeah, just a sec. It seems that I need to share this screen, so it's going to overlap here. Presentation, just a sec. A little bit. Okay, so I guess you start to see the presentation now, because I cannot see the...
Yes, it works. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll put it full screen once more. Just... Okay, now it's perfect. So my name is Mika Huhtamäki. I'm the Deputy CEO of Vastu Group. And Vastu Group is a company that is operating a lot of personal and business and industrial data. And for the last 4.5 years, I've been working the my data and personal data sharing under the context of a business and also in the context of a smart cities. And I'm taking this presentation from the angle of the lessons we have learned and what we have been doing in the My Data Global, in the smart city context, and what kind of ideas and requirements we have seen for the rule books. So the trust is the key term here. I'm using this climbing picture, which is a real one from my travel, but it combines the idea of a rule book as well. We have a legal, what we have to follow. We have a tech that implements certain practices, but then we have the use cases, the business and the ecosystem, which is the environment. And we have to adapt there with the multiple stakeholders and understanding the roles of the stakeholders. So to make it work, we take the background that Marco already introduced. So we have been using the approach of the Citrus rulebook as a baseline and taking this business, legal, tech and ethical angle, and of course describing the stakeholders and roles and stuff like that. But taking that into more practical view, I want to introduce the idea of the My Data operator, which can be described as a data intermediary in the terms of the DTA. So separation of concerns and powers. So first of all, the approach what we have been taking is that My Data operator usually is not acting as a data storage or a personal data storage. It's more acting as like an intermediary operator that connects parties and takes care of the connectivity and the permissions. And permissions may include all the permissions defined by the GDPR. And then the identity is also a vital part of that, because when we are speaking about personal data, the ownership of the data has to be justified. And to do that, we need to know that who is the owner of the email or social security number and so on. And that guarantees for us the information that we know that the person who is giving the permission is the right one. So the identity is a vital part of that. And then operator takes care of orchestrating all that and orchestrating the data sources and the data using services. But it's not touching the data. It's more like an access controller and a network builder. So that is a vital context. So now getting to the rulebook part of the presentation. Rulebook is just one part of this whole field of agreements that have to be in place. And stakeholders, what we see here are the person, the data subject, obviously. Then we are speaking about the data operator and multiple data operators at the end. Then data sources, which are typically the data controllers who are collecting the data and then hopefully sharing it with a permission. And the data using services, which may act as a data controller at the same time, or at least as a data processor. So the trust group, I'm referring to the rulebook as a trust group, a group of parties who agree certain practices. So we're speaking about operators sharing certain terms and practices, which I'm going to cover a little bit later. Data source, they have to have their own terms. They may even include their own agreements, but that's a separate thing. And then data using service, we have to define that what are the ways to get on the board. And then the interoperability requirements. So how do the operators are required to interoperate? We are not speaking about building isolated islands here, but we are building a network. And then obviously the person, the data subject is a vital part of it, and we need terms of service for the user as well. And then the data sharing agreements and data reuse terms are coming from the data source in most of the cases. And there might be other agreements as well related to certain data space areas like health or so on. Now, let's take a simplified overview of an operator network. We have data using service A, B, and C, and the color indicates that through which operator they have been enrolled to the network. Then we have the operators, A, B, and C, and then we have data sources enrolled by a particular operator. Now, if there is a data using service that needs data from 3 different data sources, and if each and every one of those data sources are enrolled by different operator, that is the spot where we need trust, because we need to trust on the operators that they have similar manners and similar practices and processes to enroll the data source to the network, as well to enroll the data using service, because operator is the mediator that is taking responsibility of the data permissions, data transfer permissions. So we need to trust on each others, and the process is how we enroll the other parties to the network. So here the operators, the operators share certain compliance. They share certain amount of interoperability, and they have to collect the audit trails of the data usage and access and so on. And then they have to be able to identify the data subjects. Otherwise, the permissions are not valid. And here, this shows also that the rulebook binds the operators and the network, but then we need terms for the data subjects, for the people who are involved. And these data subjects can be also legal entities like companies. So that is more like an end user agreement, which is built on top of the rulebook, which is provided by each and every one of the operators and hopefully shared by the operators. But operator technologies may vary. Now, the enrollment process of the data sources. First of all, each and every one of the data source, they may have different limitations for the data sharing, and that has to be respected. Then we have different data spaces or categories. So let's say that there is a medical data and then there is skills data. Operator has to be able to categorize the data source based on their own limitations, what they want to emphasize for the data usage and what kind of rules they want to have of the data usage. So basically that what kind of a service can use that data. For example, media type of a service cannot use health data. So that is part of the enrollment as well, checking that the party is functioning and legal obligating party that can be trusted and shares the processes overall in the network. Then the data using service part reminds a little bit the data source, but here it's again compliance check, and especially here it's vital that each and every one of the operators who enrolls these data using services to the network have same processes, that what kind of companies or what kind of parties can be enrolled, what kind of rules they have to have in place, do they respect GDPR, how that is being verified, is the company alive or not, and then in what kind of data space they're operating, so that we know that this is a media, they can access certain type of data, but not all, and so on. So that is something that has to be done in a standardized manner by each and every one of the operators. Here is now the example that what may happen. We have an operator B that has a data using service B, but actually has to use data from 3 different sources. And these sources have been enrolled by the operator A and C. So that means that the operator B has to trust that these sources are properly enrolled and they know how the personal data is being managed. And also there is a common way to manage the access to the data with the permission given by the data subject, which is behind the data using service. So this is the way how we see it in the interoperability model. Operators do not need to share internally the same technology, but they have to approve certain data connectors and certain rules binding to those connectors and certain enrollment practices, so that each and every one of the operators can trust to the data sources and data using services in the network. Then one last thing is that it is possible that these operators may act in overlapping networks, and there are different overlapping rules in different networks. This may happen in a city context or in a business context, and it's a completely viable setup, but it's also a little bit challenging because we know that people or companies may be facing overlapping rules which may be actually excluding rules so that you cannot be in all the networks. But this is something that has to be part of the rule book and has to be understood. This happens in the SSI networks, for example. If we are sharing identity over different SSI networks, there are different rules in Finland or in Germany, for example, for the SSI ID network. Now I'm taking an example how we have been starting to implement this together with the City of Helsinki. So we are acting as a MyData operator for City of Helsinki, and with them we have been playing with the idea that how this could be done. We have been starting from the bottom by introducing this kind of a connector on top of a data source, which is kind of like an electricity socket in a data world, and that is binded to a rule book, so that each and every one of the operators who are part of this trust group can access that source. And then the source and the data provider knows that the access control is the same and the audit trail that is being generated is the same, so they can trust that the usage of the data is done by every single operator in a similar way, and they can control the audit trail and see that what is going on, and they don't need to implement different versions of the data connector for each and every one of the operators. So basically we have a data source with a connector, which is a gatekeeper, and then the trust group and an operator, which is part of the trust group. And this is a city context, what I'm showing here, but actually this can be implemented in a business as well. And idea is that operators may have different technologies, but they share these connectors, which is binded into this trust rule book for the members, and the services are also part of that. And basically data sources have to implement or actually have only one connector. They need only one connector to provide the data, and they can serve 3 different operators in this case. And the persons obviously at the end have their own terms here. So this is something that we have been starting to implement together with Helsinki. And a connector is kind of a standard data socket that is similar with the IDS data space connector. And we have seen that different organizations, such as My Data Global or OpenSL Smart Cities or IDSA, they have similar needs. And now the question is that how these different organizations could have a shared approach for this, because most probably the cities or the businesses, they have similar needs, they share the similar data sources, and they may actually share the operator functionalities. So it's quite obvious that different organizations who are coming from different angles have to start to think about that, how we standardize that. Then the trust group is the other angle, what we have been starting to do, that how we can implement a collaboration between 2+ operators. And we already have been discussing with a couple of operators about that how that could be done. The legal rulebook is, of course, then the framework that covers all that. And then right now with the Helsinki, it's kind of a paper framework. So we do not have any automated agreements, but it's a paper that each and every one of the parties sign and agrees on, and then we can start to use this trust group to share the data. But then later on, we are planning to include these machine-readable rules for certain data agreements. And that could be done in a manner of new governance, and it could be attached into the access gateway or the connector as a logical component in the network. What we have been doing already is open source connector, what we are calling access gateway, which is available together with Helsinki. And that is something that we see that should be shared each and every one of these projects. And actually, for the future, for the long future, we need to think about that, how this kind of a data sharing connector or socket could be shared as much as possible to enable the data flow in a bigger scale. That's my presentation. Hopefully you got some insights about our thinking and how we see the rule book in our future dreams, but also some practicalities, how we have been implementing it together with Helsinki as a first step. And with the Helsinki right now, we are at the stage that we have a Helsinki, but we have dealing with a couple of other cities and are starting to investigate how to do the collaboration between between 2 or 3 operators in the network.
Great, thank you, Mika, and let's leave the questions to the last part of the session, and also, well, I mean, there is the link, of course, also to the Open and Agile Smart Cities that you didn't mention, but I think in this context, an IDSA context, so it makes a lot of sense to also think of all of this being kind of IDS compliant, and how do you build those sockets, those connectors based on IDS connectors, and that still is work to be done. But hey, let's move to the next one. Thank you, Mika. And the next, I'm very happy to have Matthias de Bievre from Visions. So you're the CEO of a company called Visions from France, and you're going to go through a very exciting developments on the side of automation of the rules. Yeah, all yours.
Thank you, Marco, for the introduction, and Bauke and Mika for the great talks. So this is a great transition because I'm going to talk about what Mika ended on. How do we automate these contracts and this rule book? So I'm the CEO of Visions. We are a My Data operator, personal data intermediary as well. The project that I'm about to talk to you about and show a concrete demonstration of the tools automates well, the rule book in a sense, to allow data sharing and to allow the automatic generation and verification of contracts for personal data sharing and consent-based data sharing. We worked on this under the NGI DAPSI program, which is an EU-funded program to fund services for data portability and personal data especially. And so it was with my company, Marco's company, 1001 Lakes, and another company called the Knowledge Innovation Center. What did we do? We took the rule book and we translated it in an API that is able to automatically generate a contract to allow organizations to sign the contract on the Ethereum blockchain, to automatically verify the validity of that contract before allowing any data transfer, and check as well the conditions inside that contract, to generate consent based on that contract. And we did a legal work to adapt it to the Data Governance Act, to consent-based data sharing, and to start allowing these share rules between different operators, as Mika was describing just earlier. And of course, everything is open source, and I will share the links of that. But before I share the link, a quick demo to show what the tool does. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm a person. I'm on a platform, here a MOOC platform. So I have followed some online classes and I have data about my profile, the classes I followed, my skills and so on. Here I'm going to try to export my data. If I try to do that, nothing will happen because there is no agreement between this organization and any other to allow data sharing. So how does this agreement work? Well, let's say now I am in the Visions data intermediary, logged in as an organization that is a data provider. As a data provider, I will be able to declare the data types I am providing to the network and describe them, describe the data model, and so on. Once I have declared the data types according and following the rulebook structure, I will be able to set terms of use on the data types. So I can bundle up some data types and create new terms of use. But just to go quicker on the demo, I've created some already that says that on these data types provided by this organization, these are the terms of use. And this is described in ODLR format. And we are working on a shared and open database of terms of use so that people can reuse terms of use without having to redefine them each time. So these are some sample data sets terms of use. And once I have, in a sense, attached these conditions to the data types, the data set is then available to the network. So if I log in as a data user, I will have to declare what I want to do with the data. So if we are still in our skills data example, I'm going to use the skills data to create a CV or to help people find a job and to help them determine their skills. And once I have declared what I want to do with the data, I can start accessing and requesting access to data presented by other organizations on the network. So our organization, what's called data provider for the demo, and I can see here the different data types they provide, and I can ask access for it for a specific purpose that I have declared. Once I have done that, the data provider will receive a notification saying this organization wants to access your data. You can see the data types I have just requested here for a specific purpose, and I can accept them. If I accept them, this is where the contract is generated. And so the contract is generated based on the rule book that was presented and adapted to personal data sharing with my data operators or data intermediaries. And so you can see a summary version of the contract, who is the data user, who is the data provider, for what purpose is the data sharing allowed, on what kind of data types, and the conditions attached to that. You can see it in full text as well, as I said, based on the rulebook. And here the implementation signs it on the Ethereum blockchain. So the data provider can sign the agreement. The data user needs to sign it as well, of course. And once both have signed it, then there is an agreement between the two organizations to share data, And now a consent can be generated and proposed to the person. So if I come back here, now as a person, I want to share my data, it will generate a consent saying, yes, we found an agreement between this and this on this purpose precisely, and I can manage this. For instance, on the allow one, there are some identity mechanisms that were described earlier as always, and I can give my consent. And here, if I just to show, if I check, I can see that this is a mock-up version of the data user, but I can see that data had just been shared between the two platforms. So this is all open source. It's an open source API automating all of this and allowing to have these automatic checks between who can ask for consents and who can exchange data on the network. So we're using it in our visions tool as I showed it, but it can be reused by anybody. And we're using it to especially work on skills data sharing use cases. And there is quite a good adoption because there is a big European project for the skills data space where you have as well institutions, employment agencies from France, from Finland, from Sweden, from the Netherlands, universities, training organizations, edtechs, private sector, and so on, all banding together to form a skills data space with use cases on helping people determine their skills, helping them find a job or a training faster, and so on. And all of them are contributing, and this data contract service based on the rulebook and this open source implementation of it is kind of the basis that is being used by the skills data space in first use cases, and also that has a great community to make it evolve, because we have planned several evolutions, including covering all other legal bases than consent, and also working a lot on this enrollment process of new members on the group. So you can join their legal and technical working groups. I will put the links again in the chat where you can find the code, when you can join the community, because this happens now inside a non-profit called Prometheus, whose goal is to govern in a sense and finance some building blocks on the skills data space. Happy also, I saw that there are IDS open source building blocks, how this can interoperate or feed into or collaborate with that. And also on the data sharing canvas block that you presented, if you have some contract templates as well, we could study their implementation in that system. Happy to answer any questions and very happy to have presented that to you today.
Excellent, thank you, Matthias. And obviously also there is a strong link on what you just presented with all of the work that in the IDSA architecture is the data usage control, and we are really kind of seeing a strong push of harmonizing how data usage control is happening, and I think it will be a very interesting exercise also to align what you've done now, Matthias, with this one, with how the data usage control is meant to be kind of enforced in the IDS architecture. So
Yes.
Some of that is already being done, but plenty of work still to be done on that side. Hey, any questions now to our excellent speakers from the audience? I'm looking at the chat. I'm right now not seeing much, but if there are any questions, anything you would like to clarify, I think it gave a really kind of a broad spectrum of things that kind of fall under the topic of rule books, as was kind of promised in the beginning, but I'm sure there are plenty of details, something you would like to learn more about these. Thanks, Matthias, for the links to Prometheus. But I don't see right now questions. So why don't I kind of turn it around a little bit and let's do a bit of an interactive exercise. So yeah, Andreas, good point. So we should have the skills data space and the work that Prometheus X is doing as one of the things to highlight also. Let's do this now. So let's move to our interactive part, and I just posted the address. It's quite simple: screen.io/lakes. So if you go to the address screen.io/lakes, so what you will see is kind of my voting, which is there is a long list, about 30 different aspects that, you know, in different rulebook approaches, we have considered to be important aspects related to rulebooks. But what I would like you to do is to go through those different aspects and kind of select from those ones, the ones that you feel that are the most important. And I don't want to put any limit on how many you can select. If you want to select all of them, be my guest. But it makes maybe more sense if you choose just, well, I mean, some of them, perhaps maximum half of them, which would be 15. So anyway, time for you to vote now, and I'll show very soon what the results are looking like, and I'm already seeing some nice votes coming in, but I will leave you some time to read because it's a long list, and kind of do your selections while you are at it. So so at least one more minute for reading and voting. Again, what are the most important aspects that a rule book should cover? I hope everybody found the address just fine, and looking like you're quite active already, so that's great. I'm giving you still a little bit more time. And again, if you have questions on, well, what do you mean by the category X, why don't you post them in the chat, because it's also good to be clearer on what are the different sides of rule books, and we could discuss them here. Now I think let's say that the time is up, so I'll just share my screen again. So you probably see the results now. So the business side and roles and responsibilities in the network between the parties seems to be number one. The governance model, the legal governance model, and kind of legal structure and the construct from the agreements point of view, that's what mainly is meant by this. And also kind of the organizational structure, the roles and kind of responsibilities of different organizations and their kind of combinations is part of the second one, but typically defined by the legal construction. Then, well, I mean, the IAM is clearly something which can be technical, considered technical. I put it here under the security class, but it's, of course, it's both technical and security. But yeah, that comes up very high. Value and utilization of data. So again, the idea is that the rulebook could be there to help to guide the different networks to figure out the business model, to understand better, who's providing value to whom, under which conditions, and really come up with solid mechanisms to have, let's say, sustainable business models for the data sharing. So that's there. And then, well, privacy and personal data comes also very high up. Well, we saw some examples just just now, but obviously that's something where there's plenty of regulation, but then there's a lot of things that has to do with kind of more specifically agreeing on how in our use cases, in our networks, in our ways of working, we actually handle personal data and come to an agreement on that. And then, so all of that. Hey, maybe Bauke, since you are, I'm a fan of the business, legal, operational, functional, technical, BLOFT approach. I added a few here on the ethics side and security side, but any comments on the vote from your side?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that that some of the less technical things and less functional things are still very high up. Because when you talk about data sharing, often people first think about the technology and the functional side of things, how it has to work. But you kind of forget about all the other important topics, such as the operational or the business side of things. So it's good to see that mindset is shifting. That those topics are seemed equally as or even more important than some of the other topics. So I think that's a very, very good development, because even if you have the functional technical interoperability, if you don't have the agreements on the business and legal side of things, then and the operational side of things, it still won't work, or you still won't get scalable, seamless data sharing. So I think it's good to see that people are realizing the importance of those topics.
Yeah. One interpretation could also be that, at least in this context, in our IDSA Winterdays context, so it's being thought that the tech side is actually already set, so it doesn't need to be kind of, again agreed in the rulebook, and therefore, for example, semantic interoperability, comes higher up because that's not agreed by something like IDS. I mean, it would be definitely something that these ecosystems typically need to be able to figure amongst themselves. But yeah, you're right. So it's interesting that all of the things higher up are non-technical, basically. Well, the security one is obviously. Mika, any comments on this one?
Yeah. First of all, I mean that I'm also happy to see the kind of business, legal, tech, ethical on the first screen. So that all those angles are there, even the ethical one, which is here in the transparency and communication. It includes other parts as well. But I pretty much agree. I was also giving my own votes that the first ones there, that we have to have roles and responsibilities. It doesn't make sense to do any tech or any legal if we do not have a clear definition for that, and that is I'm happy about that it's clearly there on the top. And the governance model is something that we need to build the trust, and who is the judge when something goes wrong or if we need to change something. So we have to have that in place. So I completely agree on that. Overall, I'm just thinking that what I was raising on my own presentation is this enrollment of the parties and the stakeholders. When we are speaking about roles and responsibilities, maybe that is something that I would like to raise here, because if we take the network and thinking it as a network, and there are different roles, the data providers, data using services, the operators, how that should be visible here. Because if the data using service is failing to obey certain rules, or the data provider doesn't respect the ethical rules and stuff like that, how that is emphasized. So it comes down how the operators or the governance of the network forces the enrollment process, and maybe something like that should be here. But otherwise, I mean that I'm 95% in line with this, what I see on the screen. So we have a pretty educated audience today.
Good. Okay, very good. Thanks, Mika. Matthias, any comments from your side?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think on the rulebook part, the technical aspects should be kept very light, and maybe it's all about standards in a sense, and just point two groups where the standards should be defined, but of course not define them in a rule book because those will change, and in a sense the concrete actors will figure it out. And so keep it very light on the technical recommendations. And I would say for what we have started to do in the skills domain, and that in a sense we see that players want to have also as much, in a sense, a wiggle room as possible, so not be too strong on all conditions, and leave quite room for freedom in the network, because that's also what guarantees the adoption of the rules and of the network and of the constraints. There should be constraints, of course, but I would say not too tight, because otherwise it's hard to agree upon, it's hard to find those precise constraints, and this limits the adoption and the actual implementation of the network.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Matthias. Hey, time is running out. Still, final point. Actually, Lars was a bit like, maybe pointing to the fact that there actually is some semantic interoperability work being done also in the IDSA information model. Sebastian, Lars can come back to that later, and then several comments also from Lars related to the whole concept of my data operator. And I think it's important that we kind of have also in the IDSA community more of this sort of it's a combination of personal data and other types of non-personal data, and then how can we have these mechanisms really kind of to guide us there. So that's an aspect that was nicely covered today by all of you. Thank you so much for participating. I think our time is up, and I give it back to Julia. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot to everyone for these insightful presentations and also for the nice interactive part. I'm sure we will keep in touch, and Marco and myself will also leverage these inputs for the working group rulebook. So thanks a lot again for staying with us today. Now for the agenda. Based on the agenda, we have our lunch break. But before that, let me give you a sneak peek into what's planned for the afternoon. So we'll have, the next session will be on building blocks and common framework for data spaces. The presenters promise to make us realize that data spaces are actually out there, and there are probably more than we can expect. Then they will also tackle the main challenges of data spaces. So if we move from bilateral agreements to few-to-few, that's already fine, but data spaces really have the ambition to have large-scale interoperability and large participation. So with this building block session, we will also be able to investigate how we can tackle that. The other session will be on tools and methodologies to get started with use cases. So if you plan to do so and you don't know how to start, make sure to join that session as well. We'll also have the chance to dive deeper into the open source topic and the IDS developer community. So we have the chance to see what's out there, have a look to the components that are already out there. So if that could be a topic for you, make sure to join the afternoon as well. And we'll also have a part where we can really leverage the networking. So we have an expo area, and our implementation partners will be there, our evaluation facilities, and also the testbed providers. So that's also a good chance to get to know the IDSA ecosystem. Yeah, so we meet back in 45 minutes. So here back in 1:30.